16. On the day following the interview with her lover in the Carmelite church, Madame de Cambes waited upon the princess with the intention of performing the promise she had given Canoles. The whole city was in commotion. News had just come to hand of the king's arrival before Vers, and of the admirable defense of Richness, who, with 500 men, had twice repulsed a royal army of 12,000. Madame la Princesse was among the first to learn the news, and, in her transports of joy, she cried, clapping her hands, "Oh, had I 100 captains like my gallant Richness!" Madame de Cambes swelled the chorus of admiration, doubly happy to be able to applaud openly the glorious conduct of a man she esteemed, and to find an opportunity ready-made to put forward a request, of which the news of defeat might have rendered doubtful success, while on the other hand its success was well-nigh made certain by the news of a victory. But even in her joy the princess had so much upon her mind that Claire dared not risk her request. The question under consideration was the sending Richness a reinforcement of men, of which it was not hard to realize his pressing need, in view of the approaching junction of Monsieur d'Epernon's army with the king's. The method of dispatching this reinforcement was being discussed in council. Claire, seeing that politics had precedence for the moment over affairs of the heart, assumed the dignified demeanor of a counselor of state, and for that day the name of Canoles was not mentioned. A very brief but very loving note advised the prisoner of this delay. It was less cruel to him than one might suppose, for the anticipation of that which we ardently desire is almost as pleasant as the reality. Canoles had too much of the true lover's delicacy in his heart not to take pleasure in what he called the antechamber of happiness. Claire asked him to wait patiently. He waited almost joyfully. The next day the reinforcement was organized, and at 11 in the morning it started up the river. But as mud and current were both adverse, they did not expect to arrive until the day following, being obliged to rely entirely upon their oars. Captain Revelli, who was in command of the expedition, was instructed to reconnoiter at the same time the Fort Braun, which belonged to Queen, and was known to be without a governor. Madame la Princesse passed the morning superintending the preliminaries and the details of the embarkation. The afternoon was to be devoted to holding a grand council of war, the purpose being to devise means, if possible, to prevent the junction between Monsieur d'Epernon and the Marechal de la Meilleraie, or at least to delay it until the reinforcement sent to Richness should have made its way into the fort. Claire had no choice then but to wait another 24 hours. About 4 o'clock, however, she had an opportunity to wave her hand and nod to Canoles as he passed under her window, and those gestures were so eloquent of regret and affection that Canoles was almost happy that he was compelled to wait. During the evening, in order to make sure that the delay would be prolonged no farther, and to leave herself no other alternative than to confide to the princess a secret as to which she felt some embarrassment, Claire requested a private audience for the next day. A request which was, of course, granted without demur. At the hour named, Claire waited upon the princess, who received her with her most charming smile. She was alone, as Claire had requested. "Well, little one," she said, "what is the grave matter that leads you to ask me specially for a private audience, when you know that I am at my friend's service at all hours of the day?" "Madam," the Viscountess replied, "amid the felicity which is your highness's due, I beg you to cast your eyes upon your faithful servant, who also feels the need of a little happiness." "With great pleasure, my dear Claire, and all the happiness God could send you would not equal that which I desire for you. Say on, pray, what favor do you desire? If it is in my power to grant, look upon it as granted before it is asked. Widow as I am, and free, too free, indeed, for my liberty is more burdensome to me than slavery would be, I desire to exchange my loneliness for a happier lot." "That is to say that you wish to marry, little one?" queried Madame de Condé with a smile. "I think so," replied Claire, blushing. "Very well, that is our affair." Claire made a deprecatory gesture. "Have no fear. We will be tender of your pride. You must have a duke and peer, Viscountess. I will look up one for you among our faithful adherents." "Your Highness is too kind. I did not propose to give you that trouble." "That may be, but I propose to take it, for I am bound to repay in happiness what you have given me in devotion. You will wait till the end of the war, won't you?" "I will wait the shortest possible time, madam," replied the Viscountess with a smile. "You speak as if your choice were already made, as if you had in hand a husband you asked me to give you. Indeed, the fact is, as your highness suggests. Upon my word, who is a lucky mortal, pray? Speak, have no fear. Oh, madam, said Claire, I know not why, but I am trembling all over. The princess smiled, took Claire's hand, and drew her to her side. Child, said she, and added, with a look which redoubled Claire's embarrassment, do I know him? I think that your highness has seen him several times. I need not ask if he is young. 28. And nobly born, he is of good family. And brave, his reputation is established. And rich, I am. Yes, little one, yes, and we have not forgotten it. You are one of the wealthiest nobles in our dominion, and we are happy to remember that in the present war, the Louis d'Or of Monsieur de Cambes and the crowns of your peasants have relieved our embarrassment more than once. Your highness honors me by recalling my devotion. Very good. We will make him a colonel in our army if he is only a captain, and a brigadier general if he is only a colonel. For he is faithful to us, I presume? He was at Lens, madam. Claire replied with craft in which she had lately become proficient by virtue of her diplomatic experiences. Excellent. Now there is but one thing left for me to learn, said the princess. What is that, madam? The name of the very fortunate gentleman who already possesses a heart, and will soon possess the hand, of the loveliest warrior in my whole army. Claire, driven into her last entrenchments, was summoning all her courage to pronounce the name of Knowles, when suddenly they heard a horse gallop into the courtyard, and in another moment the confused murmur of many voices, indicating the arrival of important news. The princess ran to window. A courier, begrimed with dust and reeking with perspiration, had just leaped from his horse and was surrounded by a number of persons, to whom he seemed to be giving the details of some occurrence. And as the words fell from his lips, his listeners were overwhelmed with grief and consternation. The princess could not contain her curiosity, but opened the window and called, "Let him come up." The messenger looked up, recognized the princess, and darted to the stairway. In a few moments he was ushered into her apartment, covered with mud as he was, with disordered hair and a hoarse, parched voice. "Pray pardon me, your highness," said he, "for appearing before you in my present condition, but I am the bearer of news of the mere utterance of which doors give way. Vayres has capitulated." The princess started back. Claire let her arms fall despairingly. Lennet, who entered behind the messenger, turned pale. 5 or 6 other persons, who had so far forgotten the respect due the princess as to invade her chamber, were stricken dumb with dismay. "Monsieur Reveille," said Lennet, for the messenger was no other than our captain of the Vales, "repeat what you said, for I find it hard to credit." "I say again, monsieur, Vayres has capitulated." "Capitulated?" echoed the princess. "What are the reinforcements you led thither?" "We arrived too late, madam. Richness was in the act of surrendering at the very moment of our arrival." "Richness surrendered!" cried Madame la Princesse. "The coward!" This exclamation sent a shiver down the back of everybody who heard it. But all remained mute, save Lennet. "Madam," said he, sternly, heedless of wounding Madame de Condé's pride, "do not forget that the honor of men is at the mercy of princes, as their lives in the hands of God. Do not brand with the name of coward the bravest of your servants, unless you would see all the most faithful abandon you tomorrow, when they see how you treat their fellows, leaving you alone, accursed and lost." "Monsieur!" exclaimed the princess. "Madam," rejoined Lennet, "I say again to your highness that Richness is not a coward, that I will answer for him with my head, and if he capitulated, it was certainly because he could not do otherwise." The princess, pale with rage, was about to hurl at Lennet one of the aristocratic invectives which she deemed a sufficient substitute for good sense, but when she saw the averted faces and eyes that avoided her own, Lennet with head erect and Reveille looking down at the floor, she realized that her cause would indeed be lost if she persevered in that fatal system. So she resorted to her usual argument. "Unfortunate princess that I am," said she, "everyone abandons me, fortune as well as men. Ah, my child, my poor child, you will undergo the same fate as your father." This wail of womanly weakness, this burst of maternal grief, found, as always, an echo in the hearts of those who stood by. The comedy, which the princess had so often enacted with success, once more accomplished its purpose. Meanwhile, Lennet made Reveille repeat all that he could tell him concerning the capitulation of Vayres. "Ah, I knew it must be so," he suddenly ejaculated. "What did you know?" the princess asked him. "That Richon was no coward, madam." "What has confirmed you in that opinion?" "The fact that he held out 2 days and 2 nights. That he would have been buried beneath the ruins of his fort had not a company of recruits rebelled and forced him to capitulate. He should have died, monsieur, rather than surrender," said the princess. "Ah, madam, can one die when one chooses?" said Lennet. "I trust," he added, turning to Reveille, "that he obtained honorable terms." "No terms at all, I fear," Reveille replied. "I was told that the negotiations were conducted by a lieutenant, so that there may have been some treachery, and instead of having an opportunity to make terms, Richon was betrayed." "Yes, yes," cried Lennet. "He must have been betrayed. I know Richon, and I know that he is incapable. I will not insult him by saying of a cowardly act, but of an act of weakness." "Oh, madam," continued Lennet. "Betrayed. Do you understand? Let us look to his safety at once. Surrender negotiated by a lieutenant, Monsieur Reveille? There is some great misfortune hovering over poor Ricon's head. Write quickly, madam. Write, I entreat you. Write," said the princess sourly. "Why should I write, pray?" "Why? To save him, madam." "Nonsense. When a man surrenders a fortress, he takes measures to ensure his own safety. But do you not understand that he didn't surrender it, madam? Do you not hear what the captain says, that he was betrayed? So, perhaps, that it was a lieutenant who signed the capitulation, and not he? What would you have me do for your Richon? What would I have you do for him? Do you forget, madam, the subterfuge to which we resorted to put him in command at Vayres, that we made use of a paper signed in blank by Monsieur d'Epernon, and that he has resisted a royal army commanded by the Queen and King in person? That Richon is the first man to raise the standard of rebellion, and that they will surely make an example of him? Ah, madam, in heaven's name, write to Monsieur de la Meilleraie, send a messenger, a flag of truce." "Upon what errand should the messenger or flag of truce be sent?" "To prevent at all hazards the death of a gallant officer. For if you do not make haste—" "Oh, I know the Queen, madam, and perhaps the messenger will arrive too late as it is." "Too late?" said the princess. "Pray, have we no hostages? Have we not some officers of the king as prisoners at Chantilly, at Montrond, and here?" Claire rose from her chair in terror. "Oh, madam, madam," she cried, "do what Monsieur Lennet says. Reprisals will not restore Monsieur Ricon's liberty." "It's not a question of his liberty, but of his life," said Lennet, with gloomy persistence. "Very well," said the princess. "What they do, we will do. Prison for prison, scaffold for scaffold." Claire cried out and fell upon her knees. "Ah, madam," said she, "Monsieur Richon is one of my friends. I have just asked you to grant me a favor, and you promised to do so. I ask you to put forth all your influence to save Monsieur Richon." Claire was kneeling. The princess seized the opportunity to grant her entreaty, what she declined to grant in obedience to the somewhat harsh advice of Lennet. She walked to a table, seized a pen, and wrote to Monsieur de la Meilleraie a request for the exchange of Richon for such one of the officers whom she held as prisoners as the Queen might select. Having written the letter, she looked about for a messenger. Thereupon, suffering as he still was from his wound and worn out by his recent expedition, Reveille offered his services, on the single condition that he should have a fresh horse. The princess authorized him to take whatever horse he chose from her stables, and the captain left the room, animated by the cries of the crowd, the exhortations of Lennet, and the entreaties of Claire. An instant after, they heard the murmuring of the people outside as Reveille explained his errand to them. In their joy, they shouted at the top of their voices, "Madame la Princesse, Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien," worn out by these daily exhibitions of herself, which she had been making in obedience to what resembled commands much more than invitations, the princess for an instant thought of refusing to comply with a popular desire. But, as commonly happens under such circumstances, the crowd was obstinate, and the shouts soon became roars. "So be it," said Madame la Princesse, taking her son by the hand. "Slaves that we are, let us obey." And, affecting her most gracious smile, she appeared upon the balcony and saluted the people, whose slave she was and queen at the same time. 17. At the moment that the princess and her son showed themselves upon the balcony, amid the enthusiastic acclamations of the multitude, the sound of drums and fifes was heard in the distance, accompanied by loud cheering. Instantly the noisy crowd which was besieging President Lalassen's house to have a sight of Madame de Condé turned their heads in the direction from which the uproar seemed to proceed, and, with little heed to the laws of etiquette, began to melt away. The explanation of their action was not far to seek. They had already seen Madame la Princesse 10, 20, perhaps 100 times, while there was a promise of something new and unfamiliar in this noise which was coming constantly nearer. "They are honest, at least," murmured Lennet, with a smile from behind the indignant princess. "But what is the meaning of all this music and shouting? I confess that I am almost as eager to know as yonder wretched courtiers." "Very well," said the princess. "Do you too leave me, and go running about the streets with them." "I would do it upon the instant, madam," said Lennet, "if I were sure of bringing you good news." "Oh, as for good news," said the princess, with an ironical glance, apparently directed to the glorious blue sky overhead, "I hardly expect anything of the sort. We are not in a lucky vein." "Madam," said Lennet, "you know that I am not easily deceived. I am very much mistaken, however, if all this noise does not mean that something favorable has happened. Indeed, the joyous character of the constantly increasing uproar, and the appearance of an excited multitude at the end of the street, with arms and handkerchiefs waving in the air, convinced the princess herself that what she was about to hear must be good news. She listened, therefore, with an eager attention which made her forget for a moment the desertion of her admirers, and distinguished these words: "Braun, the governor of Braun. The governor's a prisoner." "Aha!" said Lennet. "The governor of Braun a prisoner. That's not half bad. In him we have a hostage whom we can hold to answer for Richon. Have we not the governor of Isle St. George?" said the princess. "I am very happy," said Madame de Tourville, "that my plan for taking Braun has succeeded so well." "Madam," said Lennet, "let us not flatter ourselves yet upon so complete a victory. Chance mocks at the plans of man, sometimes even at the plans of woman." "But, monsieur," retorted Madame de Tourville, bristling up as usual, "if the governor is taken, the place must be taken. Your logic is not absolutely unanswerable, madam. But have no fear that I shall not be the first to congratulate you, if to you we owe a twofold result of such importance." "The most surprising thing to me in all this," said the princess, beginning to cast about already for something, in the anticipated good news, wounding to the aristocratic pride which was her most prominent characteristic. "The most surprising thing to me is that I was not the first person to be informed of what had taken place. It is an unpardonable neglect of propriety, like everything that Monsieur le Duc de la Rochefoucauld does." "Why, madam," said Lennet, "we haven't soldiers enough to do the fighting, and yet you would have us take some of them from their posts to make couriers of them. Alas! Let us not be too exacting, and when good news arrives, let us take it as God sends it, and not ask how it came." Meanwhile, the crowd continued to increase in size, as all the detached groups joined the main body, even as the small streams flow into a great river. In the center of this main body, composed of perhaps 1,000 persons, was a little knot of soldiers, 30 men at most, and, surrounded by these 30 men, a prisoner whom they seemed to be protecting from the fury of the mob. "Death! Death!" cried the populace. "Death to the governor of Braun." "Ah!" exclaimed the princess with a triumphant smile. "It seems that they really have a prisoner, and that the prisoner is the governor of Braun." "Yes," said Lennet. "But look, madam, it seems also that the prisoner's life is in danger. Do you hear the threats? Do you see the fierce gestures? Why, madam, they are trying to force their way through the soldiers. They mean to tear him in pieces. Oh, the tigers, they smell the flesh and thirst for blood." "Well, let them drink it," said the princess, with a ferocity peculiar to women when their bad passions are aroused. "Let them drink it. It's the blood of an enemy." "Madam," said Lennet, "yonder prisoner is under safeguard of the honor of the Condés. Remember that. And furthermore, who can say that at this moment Richon, our gallant Richon, is not exposed to the same danger as this poor wretch? Ah, they will force the soldiers back. If they reach him, he is lost. 20 volunteers this way," cried Lennet, turning about. 20 volunteers to help in driving back this canaille. If a hair on the prisoner's head is injured, your heads will answer for it. Go." At the word, 20 musketeers of the civic guard, belonging to the best families of the city, rushed like a torrent down the stairs, forced the crowd aside by dint of dealing blows right and left with club muskets, and reinforced the escort. It was high time, for a few claws longer and sharper than the rest had already torn some pieces from the prisoner's blue coat. "I faith, messers, I thank you," said the prisoner, "for you came just in time to prevent my being devoured by these cannibals. It was very well done of you. Pest, if they eat men up in this way, on the day that the royal army attempts an assault upon your city, they will devour it raw." With that, he shrugged his shoulders carelessly and began to laugh. "Ah, he's a brave man," cried the crowd, observant of the somewhat artificial calmness of the prisoner, and they repeated the pleasantry which flattered his self-esteem. "He's a true hero. He's not afraid. Long live the governor of Brawn." "Gad, yes," cried the prisoner. "Long live the governor of Brawn. That would suit me wonderfully well." In a twinkling, the popular rage changed to admiration, and this last sentiment was expressed in most emphatic terms. A veritable ovation took the place of the threatened martyrdom of the governor of Brawn, in other words, of our old friend Cavaignac. For as our readers have undoubtedly guessed ere this, it was Cavaignac who was making this melancholy entry into the capital of Guyenne. Meanwhile, protected by his guards and by his presence of mind, the prisoner of war was taken to the house of President Lelasse, and was haled before the princess by half of the escort, while the other half stood guard at the door. Cavaignac entered Madame de Condé's apartment with proud and tranquil bearing, but truth compels us to state that his heart was beating wildly beneath this heroic exterior. At the first glance he was recognized, despite the deplorable condition in which the mob had left his fine blue coat, his gold lace, and his feather. "Monsieur Cavaignac," cried Lennet. "Monsieur Cavaignac, governor of Brawn," added the princess. "Ah, monsieur, this much resembles downright treason." "What said your highness?" queried Cavaignac, realizing that now, if ever, he must summon to his aid all his impudence and all his wit. "I thought that I heard the word treason." "Yes, monsieur, treason. For what is this title under which you appear before me?" "The title of governor of Brawn, madam." "Treason, as you see. By whom is your commission signed?" "By Monsieur de Mazarin." "Treason, twofold treason, as I said. You are governor of Brawn, and it was your company that surrendered Vayres. The title was a fitting reward of the base deed." At these words, Cavaignac's face expressed the most unbounded amazement. He looked all about, as if seeking the person to whom this extraordinary language was addressed, and convinced at last that the princess's accusation was aimed at no other than himself, he let his hands fall by his sides with despairing gesture. "My company surrendered Vayres," he exclaimed. "Does your highness make such a charge against me?" "Yes, monsieur, I do. Pretend to know nothing of it. Affect amazement. You are evidently a clever comedian, but you will not make me the dupe of your grimaces or your words, although they harmonize so perfectly with one another. I pretend nothing, madam. How can your highness say that I know what took place at Vayres, when I have never been there? Subterfuge, monsieur, subterfuge. I have nothing to say in reply to such words, madam, except that your highness seems displeased with me. I pray your highness to forgive the frankness of my character for freedom of which I make bold to defend myself. I was of the opinion that I had reason to complain of you." "To complain of me, monsieur?" cried the princess, amazed at his audacity. "Most assuredly, madam," rejoined Cavaignac, with undiminished self-possession. "Relying upon your word and that of Monsieur Lennet here present, I levy a company of gallant fellows, and I enter into agreements with them, which are more sacred in that they are in almost every instance merely verbal agreements. And lo, when I ask your highness of the amount agreed upon, a mere trifle, 30 or 40,000 livres, to be used, not for myself, observe, but for the new defenders of the cause of Messrs. Les Princes recruited by me, your highness refuses to give him to me. Yes, refuses me. I appeal to Monsieur Lennet." "It is true," said Lennet. "When Monsieur made his demand, we had no money. And could you not wait a few days, monsieur? Was your fidelity and that of your men a matter of a moment?" "I waited the length of time that Monsieur La Rochefoucauld himself asked me to wait, madam. A week. At the end of the week, I made my appearance again, and was then met with a formal refusal. Once more I appealed to Monsieur Lennet. The princess turned to her advisor with compressed lips and eyes darting fire from beneath her frowning brow. "Unfortunately," said Leonard, "I am forced to admit that what Monsieur says is the exact truth." Cavaignac drew himself up triumphantly. "Tell me, madam," said he, "what would a schemer have done under such circumstances? He would have sold himself and his men to the queen. But I, who have a horror of intrigue, dismissed my company and released every man from his agreement. And, being left entirely alone, I maintained absolute neutrality. I did what the sage advises a man who is in doubt to do. I held aloof." "But your soldiers, monsieur, your soldiers!" cried the princess excitedly. "Madam," Cavaignac retorted, "as I am neither king nor prince, but a simple captain, as I have neither subjects nor vassals, I call no soldiers mine, save those whom I pay. And as those whom you call mine were, as Monsieur Leonard affirms, not paid at all, they were free." Thereupon they turned against their new leader. What was I to do? I confess that I do not know. "But what have you to say, monsieur, as to having taken the king's part yourself? That your neutrality was a burden to you?" "No, madam, but my neutrality, honest as it was, aroused the suspicion of His Majesty's partisans. One fine morning I was arrested at the Golden Calf Inn on the Libourne Road and taken before the Queen. And then you came to terms with her?" "Madam," Cavaignac replied, "a man of heart has his sensitive spots, which a keen-sighted sovereign is sure to select for attack. My heart was embittered because I had been driven out of a party, which I had rushed into blindly, with all the ardor and good faith of youth. I appeared before the Queen between two soldiers who were ready to kill me. I expected reproaches, insults, death, for after all, I had served the cause of the princes in intention. But, contrary to my expectations, instead of punishing me by depriving me of liberty, by consigning me to prison or to the gallows, that great princess said to me, 'My gallant but deluded gentleman, I can with a word cause your head to fall, but you have met with ingratitude over yonder. Here you shall find us grateful. In the name of Saint N, my patron saint, you shall be numbered henceforth among my retainers. Messers,' she continued, addressing my guards, 'treat this officer with respect, for I appreciate his meritorious qualities, and I make him your chief. And as for yourself,' she added, turning again to me, 'I make you Governor Braun. This is how a queen of France avenges herself.'" What could I reply? Pursued Cavaignac, resuming his natural tone and attitude, after mimicking, in a half-comic, half-sentimental way, the voice and gestures of Anne of Austria. "Nothing. I was disappointed in my fondest hopes. I was disappointed in the result of my action and lay my devotion unrewarded at your Highness's feet, after I had had the good fortune, as it gives me great joy to remember, to render you a slight service at Chantilly. I followed the example of Coriolanus, and sought the tents of the Volsci. This discourse, delivered in a dramatic voice and with majestic bearing, made a profound impression upon those who heard it. Cavaignac realized that he had triumphed when he saw the princess turn pale with rage. "In heaven's name, monsieur," said she, "to whom are you faithful?" "To those who appreciate the delicacy of my conduct," was Cavaignac's retort. "Be it so. You are my prisoner." "I have that honor, madam, but I trust that you will treat me as a gentleman. I am your prisoner. It is true, but without having borne arms against your Highness. I was on my way to my post with my baggage, when I fell in with a party of your troops, who arrested me. I did not for an instant think of concealing my rank or my opinions. I say again, therefore, that I demand to be treated as a gentleman and as an officer of high rank." "You will be so treated, monsieur," said the princess. "You will have the city for your prison, but you must swear to make no attempt to leave the city." "I will swear whatever your Highness chooses to demand." "Tea as well. Leonard, repeat the formula to monsieur. We will receive his oath." Leonard dictated the terms of the oath which Cavaignac was required to take. Cavaignac raised his hand and solemnly swore that he would not leave the city until relieved from his oath. "You may now withdraw," said the princess. "We rely upon your honor as a gentleman and a soldier." Cavaignac did not wait to be told twice, but as he went out he detected a gesture of the counselor, which signified, "He has put us in the wrong, madam. This is what comes of a niggardly policy." The fact is that Leonard, who was quick to appreciate merit of every variety, recognized Cauvignac's exceeding shrewdness, and, for the very reason that he was in no wise deceived by any of his specious arguments, admired the skill with which the prisoner had extricated himself from one of the most difficult dilemmas in which a turncoat could be involved. Cauvignac meanwhile went slowly downstairs deep in thought, with his chin in his hand, saying to himself, "Now the question is how I can sell them my 150 men again for 100,000 livres, which is quite possible, as the upright and intelligent Ferguson has obtained full liberty for himself and his men. I shall find an opportunity one day or another. After all, I see that I did not make such a very great blunder in allowing myself to be taken as I at first thought." 18. Let us now take a step backward and direct the attention of our readers to the events that had taken place at Vayres, with which they are as yet only imperfectly acquainted. After several assaults, which were the more terrible in that the royalist general sacrificed his men recklessly in order to save time, the outworks were carried, but their brave defenders, after contesting the ground foot by foot and heaping up the dead and wounded at the foot of the ramparts, retired by the underground passage and entrenched themselves in the main fortification. Now Monsieur de la Meilleraie did not fail to realize that, if he had lost 500 or 600 men in carrying a wretched earthwork surmounted by a palisade, he was practically certain to lose 6 times as many in carrying a fort surrounded by stout walls, and defended by a man whose strategic skill and soldierly gallantry he had discovered to his cost. He had determined therefore to open trenches and lay siege to the place in due form, when he spied the advance guard of the Duc d'Epernon's army, which had effected its junction with his own, so that the royal forces were doubled. This put an entirely different face upon the affair. It was at once decided to undertake with 24,000 men what they dared not undertake with 12,000, and to make an assault on the following day. By the cessation of work upon the trenches, by the new dispositions which were seen to be in progress, and above all by the appearance of strong reinforcements, Richon understood that the besiegers proposed to give him no rest, and apprehending an assault upon the morrow, he called his men together, in order to make sure of the state of feeling among them, although he had no reason to doubt their zeal. In view of the manner in which they had supported him in the defense of the outworks, his astonishment knew no bounds. Therefore, when he discovered the change in the attitude of the garrison, his men gazed gloomily and uneasily at the royal army, and threatening murmurs arose in the ranks. Richon had no patience with pleasantry in wartime, especially pleasantry of that sort. "Who's muttering there?" he demanded, turning toward the spot where the sounds were most distinct. "I," replied one man, bolder than his fellows. "You?" "Yes, I. Come forward and answer my questions." The man left the ranks and approached his chief. "What do you lack that you dare complain?" said Richon, folding his arms and fixing his eyes sternly upon the malcontent. "What do I lack?" "Yes, what do you lack? Have you your ration of bread?" "Yes, commandant." "Your ration of wine?" "Yes, commandant." "Are your quarters unsatisfactory?" "No." "Are any arrears to you?" "No." "Tell me, then, what you want." "What do these murmurs mean?" "They mean that we are fighting against our king, and that comes hard to the French soldier." "So you sigh to be in his majesty's service?" "Dame, yes." "And you wish to join your king?" "Yes," said the soldier, who was deceived by Richon's calm manner, and supposed that the affair would end with his simple exclusion from the garrison. "Very well," said Richon, seizing the man by his baldric. "But as the gates are closed, you must take the only road that is left open to you." "What is that?" queried the terrified soldier. "This," retorted Richon, lifting him with his Herculean arm and tossing him over the parapet. The soldier, with a yell of terror, dropped into the moat, which, luckily for him, was full of water. This energetic action was greeted with gloomy silence. Richon believed that he had crushed the sedition, and turned his men with the air of a gambler who risks everything to gain everything. "Now," said he, "if there are any partisans of the king here, let them say so, and they will be allowed to go and join him by the same road." 100 voices answered, "Yes, yes, we are on the king's side, and we want to leave the fort." "Oh ho!" exclaimed Richon, realizing that he had to deal, not with the whim of a single man, but with a general revolt. "Oh ho! That's another matter. I thought that I had simply one malcontent to deal with, but I see that I have 500 cowards." Rick Hahn did very wrong to include the whole garrison in his accusation. Only 100 men or thereabouts had spoken. The rest had held their peace, but they began to grumble too when they were included in the charge of cowardice. Come, come, said Rick Hahn. Let us not talk altogether. If there is an officer who is willing to be false to his oath, let him speak for all. I give you my word that he may speak with impunity. Ferguson thereupon stepped out from the ranks and said, saluting his commanding officer with irreproachable courtesy, Commandant, you hear the wish expressed by the garrison. You are fighting against His Majesty our King. Now the greater number of us were not informed that we enlisted to make war upon such a foe. One of these brave fellows, finding this violence done to his opinions, might easily, in the excitement of the assault, have made a mistake in his aim and lodged a bullet in your brain. But we are loyal soldiers, not cowards, as you wrongfully called us. This, then, is our ultimatum, which we make known to you with due respect. Send us the king, or we shall go to him of our own motion. This speech was received with a universal shout of approval, which proved that the opinion expressed by the lieutenant was shared by the greater part, if not the whole, of the garrison. Rick Hahn saw that all was lost. I cannot defend the place alone, he said, and I do not propose to surrender, as my soldiers abandon me. Let someone negotiate for them, as he and they think best, but that someone shall not be myself. If the few brave fellows who remain faithful to me, provided that there are any such, are promised their lives, I ask nothing more. Who will be your spokesman? I will be Commandant, if you have no objection, and if my comrades honor me with their confidence. Yes, yes, Lieutenant Ferguson, cried 500 voices, among which those of Barabbas and Caratal could easily be distinguished. You are to be the man, monsieur, said Rick Hahn. You are free to go out and in as you choose. And you have no special instructions to give me, Commandant. Liberty for my men. And for yourself? Nothing. Such disinterestedness would have brought to their senses men who had been misled, simply, but these men were sold. Yes, yes, liberty for us, they cried. Have no fear, Commandant. I will not forget you in the capitulation. Rick Hahn smiled sadly, shrugged his shoulders, and withdrew to his own apartments, where he shut himself in. Ferguson at once visited the royalist camp. Monsieur de la Meilleraie would do nothing, however, without the Queen's authorization, and the Queen had left Nanon's little house in order, as she herself said, to avoid witnessing the further humiliation of her army, and had Baedeker herself to the Hotel de Ville at Libourne. The marshal therefore placed Ferguson under guard, took horse, and galloped to Libourne, where he found Monsieur Mazarin, to whom he had, as he supposed, momentous news to announce. But at the marshal's first words, the minister stopped him to say with his stereotyped smile, We know all that, Monsieur le Marechal. It was all arranged last evening. Treat with Lieutenant Ferguson, but make no terms for Monsieur Rick Hahn except upon your word. What's that? Except upon my word, exclaimed the marshal. When my word is given, it is as sacred, I trust, as any written engagement. Go to, Monsieur le Marechal. I have received special indulgences from His Holiness, which make it possible for me to relieve people from their oaths. That may be, said the marshal, but those indulgences do not apply to marshals of France. Mazarin smiled and signified to the marshal that he was at liberty to return to the camp. The marshal took his leave grumbling, and gave Ferguson his written guarantee for himself and his men, but simply pledged his word concerning Rick Hahn. Ferguson returned to the fort, which he and his companions abandoned an hour before dawn, after informing Rick Hahn of the marshal's verbal promise. 2 hours later, as he was watching from his window the arrival of Reveille with reinforcements, Rick Hahn was arrested in the name of the Queen. At the announcement, the gallant commandant's face expressed the liveliest satisfaction. If he were allowed to be at liberty, Madame de Condé might suspect him of treason. A captive, his captivity would justify him in her sight. It was this hope which led him to remain behind, instead of leaving the fort with the others. They did not content themselves, however, with taking his sword simply as he expected. But when he was disarmed, for men who were awaiting him at the door threw themselves upon him and bound his hands behind his back. Rick Hahn endured this unworthy treatment with the tranquility and resignation of a martyr. He was one of the steadfast, stern-tempered souls who begot the popular heroes of the 18th and 19th centuries. He was taken under guard to Libourne and carried before the Queen, who eyed him arrogantly, before the King, who honored him with a ferocious, withering gaze, and before Monsieur de Mazarin, who said to him, "You played a bold game, Monsieur Rickhon, and lost, did I not, Monseigneur? Now it only remains for me to find out what the stake was." "I greatly fear that the stake was your head," said Mazarin. "Inform Monsieur d'Epernon that the king desires his presence," said Anne of Austria. "Let this fellow await his trial here." With superb disdain in her every movement, she left the room, leading the king by the hand, and followed by Monsieur de Mazarin and her courtiers. Monsieur d'Epernon had arrived an hour before, but like the amorous old fellow he was, his first visit was to Nanon. In the heart of Guyenne, he learned of the glorious defense made by Canoles at Isle St. George, and, having always the utmost confidence in his mistress, he congratulated her upon the conduct of her beloved brother, whose countenance, however, he frankly observed, did not give promise of so great nobility of soul or so great valor. Nanon had something else to do than laugh in her sleeve at the prolongation of the blunder. At that moment she had to think, not only of her own happiness, but of her lover's liberty. Nanon loved Canoles so devotedly that she could not harbor the thought of his infidelity, although that thought came often to her mind. She had seen naught but affectionate solicitude in the pains he had taken to send her away from him. She believed him to be an unwilling prisoner. She wept and thought of nothing but the moment when, with the powerful assistance of Monsieur d'Epernon, she might obtain his freedom. So it was that she had written again and again to the dear Duke, doing everything in her power to hasten his return. At last he had arrived, and Nanon lost no time in presenting to him her petition touching her pretended brother, whom she was insanely anxious to rescue at the earliest possible moment from the hands of his enemies, or rather from those of Madame de Cambes, for she believed that Canoles in reality was in danger of no worse fate than falling in love with the Viscountess, but that in Nanon's I was the worst of all dangers. She therefore implored Monsieur d'Epernon, upon her knees, to set her brother at liberty. "Why, it could not happen better," replied the Duke. "I have this moment learned that the governor of Vers has allowed himself to be taken, and we will exchange him for our brother Canoles." "Oh!" cried Nanon, "this is a special favor from heaven, my dear Duke. You love this brother of yours very dearly, do you not, Nanon?" "Oh, yes, more than my life." "How strange it is that you never mentioned him to me until that day when I was fool enough." "Then, Monsieur le Duc, you will?" said Nanon. "I will send the governor of Vers to Madame de Condé, who will send Canoles to us. That is done every day in wartime. An exchange, pure and simple. But will not Madame de Condé deem Monsieur de Canoles of more value than a simple officer?" "Oh, well, in that case we will send her 2 or 3 officers instead of 1. In short, we will arrange the matter to your satisfaction, my love, and when our gallant governor of Isle St. George arrives at Libourne, we will give him a triumph." Nanon's delight was beyond words. To have Canoles once more in her possession was her one burning desire. As for what Monsieur d'Epernon might say when he learned who Canoles really was, she cared but little. Once Canoles was safe beside her, she would tell the Duke that he was her lover. She would proclaim it from the housetops, that all the world might hear. At this juncture the Queen's messenger appeared. "Well, well," said the Duke, "this is most fortunate. Dear Nanon, I will wait upon her Majesty, and bring back with me the request of the exchange, so that my brother may be here tomorrow, perhaps." "Go, then go," cried Nanon, "and do not lose an instant. Oh, tomorrow, tomorrow," she added, raising her arms with a lovely imploring expression. "Tomorrow, God grant it." "Ah, what a loving heart," muttered Monsieur d'Epernon as he left the room. When the Duc d'Epernon entered the Queen's apartment, Anne of Austria, flushed with wrath, was biting her thick Austrian lips, which were the special admiration of her courtiers, for the very reason that they were her only ugly feature. Monsieur d'Epernon, a famous squire of dames and accustomed to their smiles, was received like one of the Bordelais rebels. He looked at the Queen in amazement. She did not acknowledge his salutation, but gazed at him with a threatening frown from the height of her royal majesty. "Aha, is it you, Monsieur le Duc?" she said at last after a pause of some duration. "Come hither that I may offer you my congratulations upon your selection of officials within your jurisdiction." What have I done, madam? I pray to know, demanded the wondering nobleman. What has happened? It has happened that you appointed to be governor of Vers a man who has fired upon the king. That is all. Ay, madam, cried the duke, your majesty is most certainly in error. I did not appoint the governor of Vers. At least, not that I am aware of. De Pernon made this reservation because his conscience reproached him with not always making his appointments without assistance. Ah, this is interesting, said the queen. Monsieur Rickhan was not appointed by you, perhaps? And she emphasized the last word most maliciously. The duke, who knew Nanon's talent for selecting fit men for the places to be filled, soon recovered his confidence. I do not recall the appointment of Monsieur Rickhan, said he, but if I did appoint him, he must be a faithful servant of the king. God's mercy, retorted the queen. Monsieur Rickhan, in your judgment, is a faithful servant of the king, a faithful servant, in good sooth, who kills 500 men for us in less than 3 days. Madam, said the duke, if such is the case, I shall be forced to admit that I am wrong. But before I am convicted, allow me to go and procure the proof that I appointed him. The queen's first impulse was to detain him, but she thought better of it. Go, said she, and when you have brought me your proof, I will give you mine. Monsieur Epernon hastened from the room and ran all the way back to Nanon. Well, said she, have you the request of the exchange of prisoners, my dear duke? Oh, yes, of course. It was an excellent time to speak of that, rejoined the duke. The queen is in a tearing rage. What is the cause of that? Because either you or I appointed Monsieur Rickhan governor of Vers, and this same governor, who seems to have defended the place like a lion, killed 500 of our men. Monsieur Rickhan, repeated Nanon. I do not know that name. The devil take me if I do. Then tell the queen boldly that she is mistaken. But are you sure that you are not mistaken? Wait a moment. I prefer to have no reason for self-reproach, so I will tell you. Nanon went to her study and consulted her register at the letter R. It contained no memorandum of a commission issued to Rickhan. You can go back to the queen, she said, returning, and tell her fearlessly that she is in error. Monsieur d'Epernon did not pause to take breath between Nanon's house and the Hôtel de Ville. Madam, said he, proudly, as he entered the queen's apartment, I am innocent of the crime imputed to me. The appointment of Monsieur Rickhan was made by your majesty's ministers. In that case, my ministers signed themselves to Pernon, retorted the queen dryly. How so? It must be so, as that signature is written at the foot of Monsieur Rickhan's commission. Impossible, madam, rejoined the duke, in the hesitating tone of a man who begins to doubt himself. Impossible? Said the queen with a shrug. Very good. Read for yourself. And she took from the table a document upon which her hand was laid. Monsieur d'Epernon seized the commission and ran it through eagerly, examining every fold of the paper, every word, every letter. A terrible thought came to his mind and kept him rooted to his place. May I see this Monsieur Rickhan? He asked. Nothing easier, replied the queen. I ordered him to be detained in the adjoining room in order to afford you that satisfaction. Bring in the villain, she added to the guards who were awaiting her orders at the door. In a moment, Rickhan was led in, with his hands bound behind his back and his hat on his head. The duke walked up to him and fastened his eyes upon him in a piercing gaze, which he endured with his wonted dignity. One of his guards knocked his hat to the floor with the back of his hand, but this insult did not cause the slightest evidence of excitement on the part of the governor of Vers. Throw a cloak over his shoulders, put a mask on his face, and give me a lighted candle, said the duke. The first 2 orders were first obeyed. The queen looked on in amazement at these strange preparations. The duke walked around Rickhan, scrutinizing him with the greatest care, trying to refresh his memory upon every detail, but evidently still in doubt. Bring me the candle I asked for, said he. That test will set my doubts at rest. The candle was brought. The duke held the commission close to the flame, and the heat caused a double cross, drawn below the signature with invisible ink, to appear upon the paper. At the sight, the duke's brow cleared, and he cried, Madam, this commission is signed by me, it is true, but it was not signed for Monsieur Rickhan or for any other person. It was extorted from me by this man in a sort of ambuscade. But before I delivered it to him, signed in blank, I had made this mark on the paper which your majesty can see, and it furnishes us with overwhelming proof against the culprit. Look." The queen eagerly seized the paper and looked at the cross which the duke pointed out to her. "I do not understand a single word of the charge you make against me," said Rickon, simply. "What's that?" cried the duke. "You were not the masked man to whom I handed this paper upon the Dordogne? I have never spoken to your lordship before this day. I have never been upon the Dordogne masked," replied Rickon, coldly. "If it was not you, it was some man sent by you. It would serve no purpose to conceal the truth," said Rickon, as calm as ever. "The commission which you hold in your hand, Monsieur le Duc, I received from Madame la Princesse de Condé, by the hands of Monsieur le Duc de la Rochefoucauld. My name had then been inserted by Monsieur Lennet, with whose writing you are perhaps familiar. How the paper came into the hands of Madame la Princesse, or Monsieur de la Rochefoucauld, where my name was written upon that paper by Monsieur Lennet, I have absolutely no idea, nor do I care, for it does not concern me." "Ah, do you think so?" retorted the Duke, in a bantering tone. Thereupon he drew near the queen, and in a low tone told her a long story, to which she listened with close attention. It was the story of his meeting with Cavaignac and the adventure of the Dordogne. The queen, being a woman, perfectly appreciated the Duke's jealousy. When he had finished, she said, "It's an infamous act to add to the high treason. The man who does not hesitate to fire upon his king may well be capable of selling a woman's secret." "What the devil are they saying there?" muttered Rickon, with a frown. For while he could not hear enough to follow the conversation, he heard enough to arouse a suspicion that his honor was being brought in question. Moreover, the flashing eyes of the Duke and the Queen promised nothing agreeable, and courageous as the Governor of Vers was, he could not avoid a feeling of uneasiness, although it would have been impossible, from calm, disdainful expression of his features, to guess what was taking place in his heart. "He must be tried at once," said the Queen. "Assemble a court-martial. You will preside Monsieur le Duc d'Epernon. So select your associates, and lose no time." "Madam," said Rickon, "there is no occasion for assembling a court-martial or for a trial. I am a prisoner upon the word of Monsieur le Marechal de la Meilleraie. I am a voluntary prisoner, for I could have gone out of Vers with my soldiers. I could have made my escape before or after their evacuation, and I did not do it." "I know nothing of business of this nature," said the Queen, rising to go into the adjoining room. "If you have satisfactory explanations to make, you can urge them upon your judges. Will not this room serve your purpose, Monsieur le Duc?" "Yes, madam," replied d'Epernon, who immediately selected 12 officers from among those in attendance and constituted the court. Rickon began to understand the situation, as the judges took their places, and the judge advocate demanded his name and rank. Rickon answered these questions. "You are accused of high treason in having fired upon the soldiers of the king," said the judge advocate. "Do you admit your guilt? To deny would be to deny what you all saw. Yes, monsieur, I fired upon the king's troops." "By virtue of what right?" "By virtue of the laws of war, by virtue of the same right which Monsieur de Conti, Monsieur de Beaufort, Monsieur d'Auboeuf, and so many others have invoked under like circumstances. That right does not exist, monsieur, for it is nothing more nor less than rebellion. But it was by virtue of that right that my lieutenant capitulated. I appeal to the terms of the capitulation." "Capitulation!" cried Monsieur d'Epernon, ironically, for he felt that the Queen was listening, and the feeling dictated the insult. "You treat with a Marshal of France. Why not when a Marshal of France treated with me? Produce your capitulation, then, and we will judge of its value." "It was a verbal agreement." "Produce your witnesses." "I have but one witness to produce." "Who is that?" "The Marshal himself." "Let the Marshal be called," said the Duke. "It's useless," interposed the Queen, opening the door behind which she was listening. "Monsieur le Marechal set out 2 hours since with the advance guard to march upon Bordeaux." With that she closed the door once more. This apparition froze the blood in every heart, for it imposed upon the judges the necessity of convicting Rickon. "Ah," said he, "that is all the regard Monsieur de la Meilleraie has for his word. You were right, monsieur," he added, turning to the Duc d'Epernon. "I was foolish to treat with Marshal of France." From that moment Rickon maintained a disdainful silence, and refused to reply to any and all questions. This course simplified the proceedings greatly, and the trial lasted little more than an hour. They wrote little and spoke still less. The judge advocate closed by demanding the imposition of the death penalty, and at a sign from the Duc d'Epernon, the judges unanimously voted for death. Rick Hahn listened to the sentence as if he were a simple spectator, and, as impassive and dumb as ever, was turned over on the spot to the provost of the army. The Duc d'Epernon betook himself to the apartments of the Queen, whom he found in a charming humor, and who invited him to dinner. The Duke, who believed himself to be in disgrace, accepted, and returned to Nanon to inform her of his good fortune in retaining his standing in the good graces of his sovereign. He found her stretched out upon a reclining chair by a window which looked upon the public square of Libourne. "Well," said she, "have you discovered anything?" "I have discovered everything, my dear." "Nonsense," said Nanon, not without some inquietude. "Mon Dieu, I mean what I say. You remember that accusation I was idiot enough to believe, the accusation that you were carrying on an intrigue with your brother? Well, you remember the blank signature that I was required to give the informer? Yes, what then? The informer is in our hands, my dear, taken in the meshes of his blank signature, like a fox in the trap." "Can it be?" said Nanon, in dismay, for she knew that Cavaignac was the man, and although she had no very deep affection for her real brother, she did not wish that any ill should befall him. Moreover, that same brother might extricate himself, tell a multitude of things which Nanon preferred to have remain secret. "Himself, my dear," continued Epernon. "What do you say to that? The rascal, with the assistance of my signature, appointed himself governor of Vers on his own authority. But Vers is taken, and the culprit is in our hands." All these details were so like Cavaignac's ingenious combinations that Nanon's alarm redoubled. "What have you done with this man?" she asked in a voice that betrayed her emotion. "Why," said the Duke, "in a moment you can see for yourself what we have done with him. Yes, faith," he added, rising. "It couldn't be better. Raise the curtain, or rather throw the window open. He's an enemy of the king, and you can see him hanged." "Hanged!" cried Nanon. "What do you say, Monsieur le Duc? The man of the blank signature is to be hanged." "Yes, my love. Look yonder. Do you not see the rope dangling from a beam, and the crowd flocking to the square? And see, there are the Fusiliers coming with the man himself. Over at the left. Look, there is the king at his window." Nanon's heart was in her mouth. One rapid glance, however, was enough to show her that the man in custody was not Cavaignac. "Well, well," said the Duke, "Sieur Rick Hahn is to be hanged as high as Haman. That will teach him to slander women." "But," cried Nanon, seizing the Duke's hand and summoning all her strength to struggle, "but the poor wretch is not guilty. Perhaps he's a gallant soldier. Perhaps he's an honorable man. It may be that you are murdering one who is innocent." "No, no, you are greatly mistaken, my dear. He is a forger and a slanderer. Besides, if there were nothing against him but his being governor of Vers, he would still be guilty of high treason, and it seems to me that, even if that were all, it would be quite enough. But hadn't he Monsieur de la Maillare's word?" "He said so, but I do not believe him. Why did not the marshal enlighten the court-martial on so important a point? He left Libourne 2 hours before the court convened." "Oh, mon Dieu! Mon Dieu!" cried Nanon. "Something tells me that he is innocent, and that his death will bring bad luck to us all. Ah, monsieur, you have great influence, and you say there is nothing you would not do for me. In heaven's name, then grant me that man's pardon." "I cannot, my dear. The Queen herself condemned him, and where she is, there is no other power." Nanon uttered a sigh which much resembled a groan. At that moment Rick Hahn reached the marketplace, and, still tranquil and silent, was led beneath the beam to which the rope was attached. A ladder was already in place awaiting his coming. Rick Hahn mounted the ladder with unfaltering step, his noble head towering above the crowd, upon which he gazed with cold contempt. The provost passed a noose around his neck, and the crier proclaimed in a loud voice that the king was about to do justice upon the body of Etienne Rick Hahn, forger, traitor, and plebeian. "The day has come," said Rick Hahn, "when it is more honorable to be a plebeian as I am than to be a marshal of France." The words were hardly out of his mouth when the ladder was pulled from under him, and his body hung trembling from the fatal beam. A universal feeling of horror scattered the crowd, without a single shout of Vive le Roi, although everyone could see the two royal personages at their window. Nanan hid her face in her hands and fled to the farthest corner of the room. "Whatever you may think, dear Nanan," said the Duke, "I believe that this execution will have a good effect. I am curious to know what they will do at Bordeaux when they learn that we are hanging their governors." As she thought what they might do, Nanan opened her mouth to speak, but she could only utter a heartrending shriek, raising her hands to heaven as if in entreaty that Rickon's death might not be avenged. Then, as if all the springs of life were dried up within her, she fell at full length upon the floor. "Well, well," cried the Duke, "what's the matter, Nanan? What does this mean? Is it possible that it puts you in such a state as this to see a mere upstart hanged? Come, dear Nanan, come to your senses. Why? God forgive me, she has fainted, and the people of Agen say that she has no feeling. Ho there, help, salt, cold water." But no one came at his call, so the Duke ran from a room to procure himself what he called for in vain from her servants, who probably did not hear him, so engrossed were they by the spectacle which the royal generosity regaled them free of charge. 19. At the moment that the terrible drama we have described was being enacted at Libourne, Madame de Cambes, seated beside an oaken table, with Pompey at her side, making a sort of inventory of her worldly goods, was writing to Quenouille the following letter. "Still another postponement, my beloved, just as I was about to pronounce your name to Madame la Princesse, and ask her consent to our union. The news arrived of the capture of Ayers, and froze the words upon my lips. But I know how you must suffer, and I am not strong enough to endure your grief and my own at the same time. The successes or reverses of this fatal war may carry us too far, unless we decide to take matters into our own hands. Tomorrow, dear, tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, I will be your wife. This is a plan which I beg you to adopt. It is of the utmost importance that you conform to it in every respect. Immediately after dinner, you will call upon Madame de Lalasne, who, as well as her sister, since I presented you to them, has conceived the greatest admiration for you. There will be card playing, and do you play like the others, but make no engagement for supper, and when night comes, send away your friends if any of them happen to be around you. When you are quite alone, you will see a messenger come in. I cannot say who it will be, who will call you by your name, as if you were wanted for some business or other. Whoever the messenger may be, follow him without fear, for he will come from me, and his errand will be to guide you to the place where I await you. I should like that place to be the Carmelite church, of which I have such pleasant memories. But as yet I dare not hope that it will be the place, unless they will consent to close the doors for us. Meanwhile, do to my letter what you do to my hand, when I forget to withdraw it from yours. Today I say to you, until tomorrow. Tomorrow I will say, forever. Quenouille was in one of his fits of misanthropy when he received this letter. During the whole preceding day, and all that morning he had not so much as seen Madame de Cambes, although in the space of 24 hours he had passed before her windows at least 10 times. Thereupon the customary reaction took place in the heart of the lovelorn youth. He accused the Viscountess of coquetry. He doubted her love. He recurred instinctively to his memories of Nanan, always kind, devoted, ardent, and glorying in a love of which Claire seemed to be ashamed. And he sighed, "Poor heart, between the satiated passion which would not die and the hungry passion which had nothing to feed upon." The Viscountess's epistle turned the scale in her favor. Quenouille read it again and again. As Claire had foreseen, he kissed it a score of times as he would have kissed her hand. Upon reflection, Quenouille could not conceal from himself that his love for Claire was and had been the most serious affair of his life. With other women that sentiment had always assumed a different aspect, and developed in a different direction. Quenouille had played his part as a squire of dames, had posed as a lady killer, and had almost arrogated to himself the right to be inconstant. With Madame de Cambes, on the contrary, he felt that he was himself under the yoke of a superior power, against which he did not even try to struggle, because his present slavery was far sweeter to him than his former dominion. And in those moments of discouragement, when he conceived doubts of the reality of Claire's affection, in those moments when the sorrowing heart falls back upon itself and augments its sorrow with bitter thoughts, he confessed to himself, without a blush for a weakness which a year earlier he would have deemed unworthy a great heart, that to lose Madame de Cambes would be an insupportable calamity. But to love her, to be beloved by her, to possess her heart and soul and body, to possess her without compromising his future independence. For the Viscountess did not even demand that he should sacrifice his opinions to join the faction of Madame la Princesse, and asked for nothing but his love, to be in the future the happiest and wealthiest officer in the king's army, for after all, why should not wealth be considered? Wealth does no harm. To remain in his Majesty's service if his Majesty should fittingly reward his fidelity. To leave it if, in accordance with the custom of kings, he proved to be ungrateful. Was not all this, in very truth, greater good fortune, a more superb destiny, if we may so say, than any to which he had ever dared aspire in his wildest dreams? But Nanon? Ah, Nanon. There was a dull, aching remorse, which lies always hidden in the depths of every noble heart. Only in hearts of common clay does the sorrow which they cause fail to find an echo. Nanon, poor Nanon, what would she do? What would she say? What would become of her when she should learn the terrible tidings that her lover was the husband of another woman? Alas, she would not revenge herself, although she would certainly have in her hands all the means of doing so, and that was a thought which tortured Quenouze most of all. Oh, if Nanon would but try to take vengeance upon him! If she would set about it in any way she might select, the faithless lover might then look upon her as an enemy, and would at least be rid of his remorse. But Nanon had not answered the letter, wherein he bade her not to write to him. How did it happen that she had followed his instructions so scrupulously? Surely, if she had wished to do so, she would have found a way to send him 10 letters. So Nanon had not even tried to correspond with him. Ah, what if Nanon no longer loved him? And Quenouze's brow grew dark at the thought that that was possible. It is a pitiful thing, thus to encounter selfish pride even in the noblest hearts. Luckily, Quenouze had one sure way of forgetting everything else, and that was to read and reread Madame de Cambes' letter. He read it and reread it, and the remedy was effectual. Our lover thus succeeded in making himself oblivious to everything except his own happiness. And to follow out his mistress's instructions from the beginning, he made himself beautiful, which was a matter of no great difficulty for a youth with his personal advantages and good taste, and set out for Madame de la Lassens as the clock was striking 2. He was so engrossed in his own happiness that as he passed along the quay, he did not see his friend Reveille, who made sign after sign to him from a boat which was coming downstream as fast as oars could drive it through the water. Lovers, in their happy moments, stepped so lightly that they seemed hardly to touch the ground, and Quenouze was already far away when Reveille stepped ashore. The latter spoke a few words in a sharp tone to boatman, and hurried away toward Madame de Condé's abode. The princess was at table when she heard a commotion in the antechamber. She inquired as to its cause, and was told that Baron de Reveille, her messenger to Monsieur de la Meilleraie, had that moment arrived. "Madam," said Lennet, "I think it would be well for your highness to receive him without delay, whatever the tidings he brings. They are important." The princess made a sign, and Reveille entered the room. But his face was so pale and grief-stricken that a glance was enough to convince Madame de Condé that she had before her eyes a messenger of evil. "What is it, captain?" said she. "What news have you?" "Pardon me, madam, for appearing before your highness in this plight, but I thought that the tidings I bring should not be delayed." "Speak. Did you see the marshal?" "The marshal refused to receive me, madam." "The marshal refused to receive my envoy," cried the princess. "Ah, madam, that is not all. What else is there? Speak, speak. I am waiting." "Poor Rick Hahn." "Yes, I know. He is a prisoner. Did I not send you to negotiate his ransom? Although I made all possible speed, I arrived too late." "What? Too late?" cried Lennet. "Can any harm have come to him?" "He is dead." "Dead," echoed the princess. "He was tried for high treason, and was condemned and executed." "Condemned? Executed? Ah, you hear, madam," said the horror-stricken Lennet. "I told you how it would he." "Who condemned him? Who was so bold?" "A court-martial presided over by the Duc d'Epernon, or rather by the queen herself. Indeed, they were not content with his death, but decided that it should be infamous." "What? Rick Hahn? Hanged, madam. Hanged like a common malefactor, like a thief or an assassin. I saw his body in the marketplace at Libourne." The princess jumped to her feet, as if acted upon by an invisible spring. Lennet uttered an exclamation of grief. Madame de Cambes, who had risen, fell back upon her chair, putting her hand to her heart, as one does when one receives a grievous wound. She had fainted. "Take the Viscountess away," said the Duc de la Rochefoucauld. "We have no leisure now to attend to swooning women." 2 women bore the Viscountess from the room. "This is a brutally frank declaration of war," said the impassive Duke. "It is infamous," said the Princess. "It is sheer savagery," said Lennet. "It is impolitic," said the Duke. "Oh, but I trust that we shall find a way to be revenged," cried the Princess, "and that right cruelly." "I have my plan," cried Madame de Tourville, who had said nothing thus far. "Reprisals, your Highness, reprisals." "One moment, madam," said Lennet. "Deuce take me, how fast you go. The affair is of sufficient importance to require reflection." "No, monsieur, not at all," retorted Madame de Tourville. "As the king has acted quickly, it is of the utmost importance that we retaliate promptly with the same stroke." "Why, madam," cried Lennet, "you talk of shedding blood, as if you were Queen of France. Upon my word, withhold your opinion, at least until her Highness requests you to give it." "Madam is right," said the captain of the guards. "Reprisals are in accordance with the laws of war." "Come," said the Duc de la Rochefoucauld, calm and unmoved as always, "let us not waste time in idle words, as we are doing. The news will soon spread through the city, and an hour hence we shall have lost control of events and passions and men. Your Highness's first care should be to adopt an attitude so firm that it will be deemed to be unchangeable." "Very well," said the Princess. "I place the matter in your hands, Monsieur le Duc, and rely entirely upon you to avenge my honor and your own affection, for Richon was in your own service before entering mine. He came to me from you, and you gave him to me rather as one of your friends than as one of your retainers." "Never fear, madam," said the Duke, bowing. "I shall remember what I owe to you, to myself, and to poor dead Richon." He led the captain of the guards aside, and talked with him a long while in a low tone, while the Princess left the room with Madame de Tourville, followed by Lennet beating his breast in his grief. The Viscountess was at the door. On recovering consciousness, her first impulse was to return to Madame de Condé. She met her on the way, but with a face so stern that she dared not question her personally. Mon Dieu, what is to be done?" she cried timidly, clasping her hands imploringly. "We are to have our revenge," replied Madame de Tourville with a majestic air. "Revenge? And how?" "Madam," interposed Lennet, "if you possess any influence over the Princess, use it, I pray you, to prevent the commission of some horrible murder under the name of reprisals." With that he passed on, leaving Claire in deadly terror. For, by one of those strange intuitions which make one believe in presentiments, the thought of Quenouille's suddenly passed through her mind. She heard a sad voice in her heart speaking of her absent lover, and rushing feverishly upstairs to her room, she began to dress to go meet him, when she perceived that the appointed time was still 3 or 4 hours distant. Meanwhile, Quenouille made his appearance at Madame de Lalassen's in accordance with the instructions contained in the Viscountess's letter. It was the president's birthday, and a birthday party was in progress. As it was the pleasantest season of the year, all the guests were in the garden, where a game of tennis was in progress upon a vast lawn. Quenouille, whose dexterity was remarkable, was the recipient of several challenges as soon as he appeared, and his skill at the game brought success to his side again and again. The ladies laughed at the awkwardness of Quenouille's rivals and his own address. Prolonged bravos followed every new stroke that he made. Handkerchiefs waved in the air, and but little more enthusiasm was needed to cause bouquets to rain down at his feet from the loveliest of hands. His triumph did not avail to banish from his mind the one great thought that filled it, but it helped him to be patient. However great one's haste to reach a goal, one endures delays more patiently when each delay is an ovation. However, as the appointed hour drew near, the young man's eyes were turned more frequently toward the door through which the guests came and went, and through which the promised messenger would naturally make his appearance. Suddenly, as Quenouille was congratulating himself upon having, in all probability, but a short time to wait, a strange rumor began to circulate through the joyous assemblage. Quenouille noticed that groups formed here and there, talking in undertones, and gazing at him with extraordinary interest, in which there seemed to be an admixture of compassion. At first he attributed this interest to his personal appearance and his dexterity being very, very far from suspecting its true cause. He began at last to notice that there was, as we have said, an admixture of something like pity in the earnest looks that were bent upon him. He approached one of the groups with smiling face. The persons who composed the group tried to smile back at him, but were visibly embarrassed, and they to whom he did not directly address himself moved away. Knowles turned in one direction after another, and saw that every one avoided his glance and slunk away. It was as if some fatal tidings had suddenly swept over the assemblage, and struck every one dumb with terror. Behind him, President de Lalas was pacing gloomily back and forth with one hand under his chin and the other in his breast. His wife, with her sister on her arm, took advantage of a moment when no one seemed to be looking to walk towards Knowles, and said, without directly addressing him, in a tone which aroused his keenest apprehension, "If I were a prisoner of war, upon parole, for fear lest the agreement made with me might be violated, I would leap upon a good horse and ride to the river. I would give 10, 20, 100 louis, if need be, to a boatman, but I would leave the city." Knowles gazed at the two women in utter amazement, and they simultaneously made a terrified gesture which he could not comprehend. He walked toward them to seek an explanation of the words he had heard, but they fled like phantoms, one with her finger on her lips to enjoin silence upon him, the other waving her hand to bid him fly. At that moment, he heard his name at the gate. He shuddered from head to foot. The name must have been pronounced by the Viscountess's messenger, and he darted in that direction. "Is Monsieur le Baron de Knowles here?" a loud voice asked. "Yes," cried Knowles, forgetting everything else to remember only Claire's promise. "Yes, here I am." "You are Monsieur de Knowles?" said a man in uniform passing through the gate. "Yes, monsieur." "Governor of Isle St. George?" "Yes." "Formerly captain in the Nivelles regiment?" "Yes." The sergeant, for such he seemed to be, waved his hand, and 4 soldiers, hidden from sight by a carriage, at once came forward. The carriage itself drove up so that its step was close to the gate, and the sergeant ordered Knowles to enter. The young man looked about. He was absolutely alone, except that he could see, among the trees in the distance, Madame de Lalas and her sister, like 2 ghosts, gazing at him, as he fancied, with compassion. "Pardieu," he said to himself, utterly unable to comprehend what was going on. "Madame de Cambes has selected a strange escort for me. However," he added, smiling at his own thought, "we must not be too particular as to the means." "We are waiting for you, Commandant," said the sergeant. "I beg your pardon, messers," Knowles replied. "I am ready." And he entered the carriage. The sergeant and 2 soldiers entered it with him. The other 2 took their places, one beside the driver and the other behind, and the lumbering vehicle rolled away as rapidly as 2 sturdy horses could draw it. All this was passing strange, and Knowles began to feel decidedly nervous. "Monsieur," said he to the sergeant, "now that we are by ourselves, can you tell me where you are taking me?" "Why, to prison in the first place, Commandant," was the reply. Knowles stared at the man in dumb amazement. "What? To prison?" he exclaimed at last. "Do you not come from a lady?" "We do, indeed." "And is not that lady Madame la Vicomtesse de Cambes?" "No, monsieur. That lady is Madame la Princesse de Condé." "Madame la Princesse de Condé!" cried Knowles. "Poor young man!" murmured a woman who was passing, and she made the sign of the cross. Knowles felt a shudder of fear run through his veins. A little farther on, a man who was running along the street, pike in hand, stopped when he saw the carriage and the soldiers. Knowles put his head to the window, and the man evidently recognized him, for he shook his fist at him with an angry and threatening expression. "Good God! People have gone crazy in this city of yours," said Knowles, still trying to smile. "Have I become in one hour an object of pity or of detestation, that some pity me and others threaten me?" "Ah, monsieur," the sergeant replied, "those who pity you make no mistake, and it may be that those who threaten you are quite right to do so." "If I only could understand what it all means," said Knowles. "You will very soon understand, monsieur." They reached the door of the prison, where Knowles was ordered to alight, amid the crowd which was beginning to collect. Instead of taking him to his usual room, they let him down into a cell filled with guards. "I must know what I am to expect," he said to himself, and taking 2 louis from his pocket, He went up to a soldier and put them in his hand. The soldier hesitated about receiving them. "Take them, my friend," said Knowles. "For the question I am about to ask you cannot compromise you in any way." "Say on, then, commandant," rejoined the soldier, first pocketing the 2 louis. "Very good. I would like to know the reason of my sudden arrest." "It would seem," said the soldier, "that you have not heard of poor Monsieur Rickon's death?" "Rickon dead," cried Knowles, in a tone of heartfelt sorrow, for the close friendship between the 2 men will be remembered. "Was he killed when the fortress was taken?" "No, commandant. He has been hanged since." "Hanged!" muttered Knowles, with pallid cheeks, looking about the ominous surroundings and the savage faces of his keepers. "Hanged! The devil! This is likely to postpone my wedding indefinitely. XX. Madame de Cambes had finished her toilet, a toilet all the more charming for its simplicity, and throwing a light cape over her shoulders, motioned to Pompey to go before her. It was almost dark, and thinking that she would be less likely to be observed on foot than in a carriage, she ordered her carriage to await her at one of the doors of the Carmelite church, near a chapel in which she had obtained permission for the marriage ceremony to take place. Pompey descended the stairs, and the Viscountess followed. This assumption of the duties of a scout reminded the old soldier of the famous patrol of the night before the Battle of Corbie. At the foot of the staircase, as the Viscountess was about to pass the door of the salon, where there was a great commotion, she met Madame de Tourville dragging the Duc de la Rochefoucauld toward the princess's cabinet, and engaged in an earnest discussion with him on the way. "One word, madam, I entreat," said she. "What decision has been reached?" "My plan is adopted," cried Madame de Tourville triumphantly. "What is your plan, madam?" "I do not know." "Reprisals, my dear, reprisals." "Pardon me, madam, but I am so unfortunate as not to be familiar, as you are, with warlike terms. What do you mean by the word reprisals?" "Nothing simpler, dear child. Pray explain yourself." "They hanged an officer in the army of Messrs. Les Princes, did they not?" "Yes, what then?" "Why, we hunt up an officer of the royal army in Bordeaux and hang him." "Great God!" cried Claire in dismay. "What do you say, madam?" "Monsieur le Duc," continued the dowager, apparently not heeding the Viscountess's alarm, "has not the officer who was in command at St. George already been arrested?" "Yes, madam," the Duke replied. "Monsieur de Knowles arrested?" cried Claire. "Yes, madam," rejoined the Duke coldly. "Monsieur de Knowles is arrested, or soon will be. The order was given in my presence, and I saw the men set out to execute it. But did they know where he was?" Claire asked with a last ray of hope. "He was at the house of our host, Monsieur de Lalas, in the suburbs, where they say he was having great success at tennis." Claire uttered a cry. Madame de Tourville turned upon her in amazement, and the Duke glanced at her with an imperceptible smile. "Monsieur de Knowles arrested," the Viscountess repeated. "In God's name, what has he done? What connection has he with the horrible occurrence which saddens us all? What connection has he with it? The very closest, my dear. Is not he a governor, as Rickon was?" Claire tried to speak, but the words died upon her lips. She seized the Duke's arm, and gazing at him in terror, succeeded at last in uttering these words in a hoarse whisper. "Oh, but it's a feint, is it not, Monsieur le Duc? Nothing more than a mere demonstration? We can do nothing, at least so it seems to me, to one who is a prisoner on parole. Rickon also, madam, was a prisoner on parole. Monsieur le Duc, I implore you, spare your supplications, madam, for they are useless. I can do nothing in the matter. It is for the council to decide." Claire dropped the Duke's arm and hurried to Madame de Condé's cabinet, where she found Lennox striding back and forth, pale and agitated, while Madame de Condé talked with the Duc de Bouillon. Madame de Cambes glided to the princess's side, as white and light of foot as a ghost. "Oh, madam," said she, "give me one moment, I entreat you." "Ah, is it you, little one? I am not at liberty at this moment, but after the council I am at your service." Madam, I must speak to you before the council." The princess was about to accede, when a door, opposite that by which the Viscountess had come in, opened, and Monsieur de la Rochefoucauld appeared. "Madam," said he, "the council has assembled and is impatiently awaiting your highness." "You see, little one," said Madame de Condé, "that it is impossible for me to listen to you at this moment. But come with us to the council, and when it is at an end we will return and talk together." It was out of the question to insist. Dazzled and bewildered by the frightful rapidity with which events were rushing on, the poor woman began to have the vertigo. She gazed wildly into faces and watched the gestures of all about her, without seeing anything, unable to understand what was going on, and struggling in vain to shake off the frightful nightmare that oppressed her. The princess walked toward the salon. Claire followed her mechanically, nor did she notice that Leonard had taken in the ice-cold hand that hung listlessly at her side like the hand of a corpse. They entered the council chamber. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening. It was a vast apartment, naturally dark and gloomy, but made even darker by heavy hangings. A sort of platform had been erected between the two doors, and opposite the two windows, through which the last feeble rays of the dying daylight made their way into the room. Upon the platform were 2 armchairs, one for Madame de Condé, the other for the Duc d'Enghien. On either side of these armchairs was a row of tabourets for the ladies who composed Her Highness's Privy Council. The other judges were to sit upon benches prepared for them. The Duc de Bouillon stood immediately behind Madame de Condé's chair, and the Duc de la Rochefoucauld behind that of the young prince. Leonard stood opposite the clerk. Beside him was Claire, dazed and trembling. 6 officers of the army, 6 municipal councillors, and 6 sheriffs were introduced and took their seats upon the benches. 2 candelabra, each containing 3 candles, furnished light for the deliberations of this improvised tribunal. They were placed upon a table in front of Madame la Princesse, so that they shed a bright light upon the principal group, while the other persons present were more or less in shadow according as they were near to or at a distance from this feeble center of light. The doors were guarded by soldiers of the army of Madame la Princesse, halberd in hand. The roaring of the crowd could be heard without. The clerk called the roll of the judges, and each one rose in turn and answered his name. Thereupon the judge advocate opened the business upon which they were called together. He detailed the capture of Vayres, Monsieur de la Malleraie's breach of his word, and the infamous death of Riccon. At that point an officer, who had been stationed at a window for that express purpose, and had received his orders in advance, threw the window open, and the voices of the people in the street rolled in waves. Vengeance for Riccon. Death to the Mazarinists. Such was the name bestowed upon the royalists. "You hear," said Monsieur de la Rochefoucauld, "what the voice of the people demands. 2 hours hence, either the people will have cast our authority to the winds and taken the law into their own hands, or it will be too late for reprisals. Adjudge this matter, therefore, messers, and that without further delay." The princess rose. "Why adjudge, I pray to know," she cried. "What purpose is to be served by a judgment? You have already heard the judgment pronounced by the good people of Bordeaux." "Indeed," said Madame de Tourville, "it would be impossible to conceive a simpler situation. It's the law of retaliation, pure and simple. Such things as this should be done by inspiration, so to speak, between provost and provost." Leonard could listen to no more. From the place where he stood, he rushed into the midst of the circle. "Oh, not a word more, madam, I beg you," he cried. "For such counsels, were they to prevail, would be too horrible in their consequences. You forget that the royal authorities themselves, although they chose to inflict infamous punishment, nevertheless preserved the forms of law, and that the punishment, whether just or unjust, was ratified by the decree of a court-martial. Do you think that you have the right to do a thing that the king dared not do? Oh, nothing more is needed than for me to express an opinion, to have Monsieur Leonard maintain the opposite," exclaimed Madame de Tourville. "Unfortunately, my opinion this time agrees with Her Highness's." "Unfortunately, indeed," said Leonard. "Monsieur!" cried the princess. "Ah, madam," continued Leonard, "preserve appearances at least. Will you not still be at liberty to condemn?" "Monsieur Leonard is right," said La Rochefoucauld. "The death of a man is too serious a matter, especially under such circumstances, for us to allow the responsibility to rest upon a single head, even though it be a princely head." Leaning toward the princess then, so that her immediate neighbors alone could hear, he added, "Madam, take the opinion of all, and then retain only those of whom you are sure, to take part in the trial. In that way we shall have no cause for fear that our vengeance will escape us." One moment," interposed Monsieur de Bouillon, leaning upon his cane and raising his gouty leg. You have spoken of taking the responsibility off the princess's shoulders. I have no desire to shirk it, but I would be glad to have others share it with me. I ask nothing better than to continue in rebellion, but in company with Madame la Princesse on the one hand and the people on the other. Damnation, I don't choose to be isolated. I lost my sovereignty of Sedan through a pleasantry of this sort. At that time I had a city and a head. Cardinal de Richelieu took my city. Today I have nothing left but a head, and I'm not anxious that Cardinal Mazarin should take that. I therefore demand that the notables of Bordeaux take part in the proceedings. Such signatures beside ours, murmured the princess. Go to... The mortise holds the timber in place, madam, rejoined Bouillon, whom conspiracy of Cinq-Mars had rendered prudent for the rest of his life. Is that your opinion, messieurs? Yes, said the Duc de la Rochefoucauld. And you, Lennet? Fortunately, madam, replied Lennet, I am neither prince nor duke, nor municipal official, nor sheriff. I am entitled to hold aloof, therefore, and I will do so. Thereupon the princess rose, and called upon the assemblage to reply in energetic and unmistakable fashion to the royal challenge. Hardly had she finished what she had to say when the window was thrown open again, and again the voices of the people without invaded the hall, crying, Vive Madame la Princesse! Vengeance for Ricon! Death to the Epernonists and Mazarinists! Madame de Cambes seized Lennet's arm. Monsieur Lennet, said she, I am dying. Madame la Vicomtesse de Cambes, he replied, request her highness's permission to retire. No, no, said Claire, I want. Your place is not here, madam, Lennet interrupted. You can do nothing for him. I will keep you informed of whatever takes place, and together we will try to save him. The Viscountess may retire, said the princess. Those ladies who do not care to be present at this function are at liberty to follow her. Not a woman stirred. One of the never-ending aspirations of that half of the human race, whose destiny it is to fascinate, is to usurp the rights of the half destined to command. These ladies saw an opportunity to play the part of men for a moment, and proposed to make the most of it. Madame de Cambes left the room, supported by Lennet. On the stairs she met Pompey, whom she had sent in quest of news. Well, said she inquiringly, he is arrested. Monsieur Lennet, said Claire, I have no confidence or hope save in you and God. And she rushed despairingly into her own room. What question shall I put to him who is about to appear before us? Madame la Princess asked, as Lennet resumed his place beside the clerk. And to whose lot shall it fall to die? It's a very simple matter, madam, replied the Duke. We have some 300 prisoners, 10 or 12 of whom are officers. Let us question them simply as to their names and their rank in the royal army, and the first one who turns out to be the governor of a fortress, as Ricon was, we will consider to be the one to whom the lot has fallen. It is useless to waste our time questioning 10 or 12 different officers, messieurs, said the princess. You have the list, Monsieur le Greffier. Just glance over it, and read the names of those who hold equal rank to Ricon's. There are but 2, madam, said the clerk, the governor of Isle St. George and the governor of Braun. We have 2 of them, it is true, cried the princess. Fate is kind to us, you see. Are they under arrest, Labasseure? Certainly, madam, the captain of the guards replied, and both are in the fortress awaiting the order to appear. Let them be brought hither, said Madame de Condé. Which one shall we bring? Asked Labasseure. Bring them both, but we will begin with the first in date, Monsieur le Gouverneur de St. George. 21. A terrified silence, broken only by the receding footsteps of the captain of the guards, and by the constantly increasing murmur of the multitude without, followed this order, which gave the rebellion of Messrs. Les Princes a more terrible and perilous aspect than any it had as yet assumed. Its inevitable effect was by a single act to place the princess and her advisers, the army and the city, outside the pale of the law. It was to burden an entire population with responsibility for the selfishness and passions of the few. It was to do on a small scale what the Commune of Paris did on the 2d of September. But, as we know, the Commune of Paris acted on a grand scale. Not a sound could be heard in the hall. All eyes were fixed upon the door through which the prisoner was expected to appear. The princess, in order to act out her part of presiding magistrate, made a pretense of looking over the lists. Monsieur de la Rochefoucauld had assumed a musing expression, and Monsieur de Bouillon was talking with Madame de Tourville about his gout, which caused him much suffering. Leonard approached the princess to make a last effort. Not that he had any hope of success, but he was one of those conscientious men who fulfill a duty because their conscience imposes upon them the obligation to do so. "Consider, madam," said he, "that you are risking the future of your house upon a single throw." "There is no great merit in that," said the princess dryly, "for I am sure to win." "Monsieur le Duc," said Leonard, turning to La Rochefoucauld, "do not you, who are so superior to commonplace motives and vulgar human passions, advise moderation?" "Monsieur," retorted the Duke hypocritically, "I am at this moment discussing the point with my reason." "Discuss it rather with your conscience, Monsieur le Duc," replied Leonard. "That would be much better." At that moment, they heard the sound of the outer door closing. The sound echoed in every heart, for it announced the arrival of one of the two prisoners. Soon steps resounded on the stairway. Halberds rang upon the flags. The door opened, and Quenouls appeared. He had never appeared so distinguished, had never been so handsome. His calm, unmoved face had retained the cheerful expression of happy ignorance. He came forward with easy, unaffected bearing, as he might have done in the salon of Monsieur Lévy or President Lalas, and respectfully saluted the princess and the dukes. The princess was amazed at his perfect ease of manner, and gazed at the young man for a moment without speaking. At last she broke the silence. "Come forward, monsieur," said she. Quenouls obeyed and saluted a second time. "Who are you?" "I am Baron Louis de Quenouls, madam." "What rank did you hold in the royal army?" "I was lieutenant colonel." "Were you not governor of Isle St. George?" "I had that honor." "You have told the truth?" "In every point, madam." "Have you taken down the questions and answers, master clerk?" The clerk bowed. "Sign, monsieur," said the princess. Quenouls took the pen with the air of a man who does not understand the purpose of command, but obeys out of deference to the rank of the person who makes it, and signed his name with a smile. "'Tis well, monsieur," said the princess. "You may now retire." Quenouls saluted his judges once more, and withdrew with the same grace and freedom from constraint, and with no manifestation of surprise or curiosity. The door was no sooner closed behind him than the princess rose. "Well, messers," said she with a questioning accent. "Well, madam, let us vote," said the Duc de la Rochefoucauld. "Let us vote," echoed the Duc de Bouillon. "Will these gentlemen be kind enough to express their opinion?" he added, turning to the municipal dignitaries. "After you, monseigneur," replied one of them. "Nay, nay, before you," cried a sonorous voice in which there was such an accent of determination that everybody stared in amazement. "What does this mean?" demanded the princess, trying to identify the owner of the voice. "It means," cried a man, rising, so that there should be no doubt as to his identity, "that I, Andre Lévy, King's advocate and counselor of Parliament, demand in the King's name, and in the name of humanity, for prisoners detained in Bordeaux upon parole, the privileges and guarantees to which they are entitled. Consequently, my conclusion is—" "Oh, monsieur l'avocat," exclaimed the princess with a shrug. "None of your court jargon in my presence, I pray you, for I do not understand it. This is an affair of sentiment that we are engaged upon, and not a paltry pettifogging lawsuit. Everyone who has a seat upon this tribunal will understand propriety of this course, I presume." "Yes, yes," rejoined the sheriffs and the officers in chorus. "Vote, messers, vote." "I said, and I say again," continued Lévy, unabashed by the princess's rebuke, "I demand their privileges and guarantees for prisoners detained on parole. This is no question of lawsuits, but of the law of nations. And I say, furthermore," cried Leonard, "that Rick Hahn was heard in his own defense before he met his cruel fate, and that it is no more than fair that we should hear these accused persons." "And I," said the Spagnat, the militia officer who took part in the attack upon St. George with Monsieur La Rochefoucauld, "I declare that if any clemency be shown, the city will rise in revolt." A shout from without seemed to echo and confirm his words. "Let us make haste," said the princess. "What penalty shall we inflict upon the accused?" "There are two of them, madam," suggested several voices. "Is not one enough for you, pray?" retorted Leonard, smiling scornfully at this sanguinary servility. "Which shall it be, then, which?" demanded the same voices. "The fattest one, cannibals," cried Lévy. "Ah, You complain of injustice and shout sacrilege, and yet you propose a reply to an assassination by 2 murders. A noble combination of philosophers and soldiers melted together into murderers. The flashing eyes of the majority of the judges seemed quite ready to blast courageous king's advocate. Madame de Conde had risen from her chair and was looking inquiringly into the faces of those about her, as if to assure herself that the words she had heard had really been uttered, and if there really was a man on earth bold enough to say such things in her presence. Levi realized that his continued presence would result in adding to the bitter feeling, and that his manner defending the accused would destroy instead of saving them. He determined to retire, therefore, but to retire rather as a judge declining to serve than as a soldier taking to his heels. "In the name of God Almighty," said he, "I protest against what you propose to do. In the king's name, I forbid it." With that, he overturned his armchair with a wrathful gesture and stalked out of the room with his head in the air, like a man strong in the consciousness of duty well done, and indifferent to the possible results thereof. "Insolent," muttered the princess. "No matter, no matter. Let him have his way," said several. "Master Levy's turn will come." "Let us vote," exclaimed the judges, almost as one man. "But why vote without hearing the accused?" said Leonard. "Perhaps one of them will seem to you more guilty than the other. Perhaps you will conclude to concentrate upon a single head of vengeance, which you now propose to divide between 2. At that moment the outer door was heard a second time. "Very good," said the princess. "We will vote upon both at once." The judges, who had left their seats in disorder, sat down once more. Again the sound of footsteps was heard, accompanied by the ringing of halberds on the flags. The door opened once more and Cavaignac appeared. The newcomer presented a striking contrast to Quenouille's. His garments still showed the effects of his encounter with the populace, despite the pains he had taken to efface them. His eyes glanced hastily from the sheriffs to the officers, from the dukes to the princess, embracing the whole tribunal in a sort of circular glance. Then, with the air of a fox devising a stratagem, he came forward, feeling the ground at every step, so to speak, with every faculty on the alert, but pale and visibly disturbed. "Your Highness did me the honor to summon me to your presence," he began, without waiting to be questioned. "Yes, monsieur, for I desire to be enlightened upon certain points relative to yourself, which cause us some perplexity." "In that case," rejoined Cavaignac with a bow, "I am here, madam, ready to requite the honor your Highness is pleased to confer upon me." He bowed with the most graceful air he could muster, but was clearly lacking in ease and naturalness. "That you may do very speedily," said the princess, "if your answers are as definite as our questions. Allow me to remind your Highness," said Cavaignac, "that, as the question is always prepared beforehand, and the response never, it is more difficult to respond than to question." "Oh, our questions will be so clear and precise," said the princess, "that you will be spared any necessity for reflecting upon them. Your name?" "Ah, madam, there you are. There's a most embarrassing question. First of all, how so? It often happens that one has 2 names, the name one has received from his family, and the name one has received from himself. Take my own case as an example. I thought that I had sufficient reason for laying aside my first name in favor of another less widely known. Which of the 2 names do you require me to give you? That under which you presented yourself at Chantilly, that under which you agreed to raise a company in my interest, that under which you did raise it, and that under which you sold yourself to Monsieur de Mazarin." "Pardon me, madam," said Cavaignac, "but I have the impression that I had the honor to reply satisfactorily to all these questions during the audience your Highness was graciously pleased to grant me this morning." "At this time I put but one question to you," said the princess, beginning to lose patience. "I simply asked you your name." "Very true, but that is just what embarrasses me." "Right, Baron de Cavaignac," said the princess. The accused made no objection, and the clerk wrote as directed. "Now, your rank?" said the princess. "I trust you will find no difficulty in replying to this question." "On the contrary, madam, that is one of the most embarrassing questions you could put to me. If you refer to my rank as a scholar, I am a bachelor of letters, licentiate in law, doctor of theology. I reply, as your Highness sees, without hesitation. "No, monsieur, we refer to your military rank." "Ah, yes, Upon that point, it is impossible for me to reply to your highness. How so? Because I have never really known what I was myself. Try to make up your mind upon that point, monsieur, for I am anxious to know. Very well. In the first place, I constituted myself a lieutenant on my own authority, but as I had no power to sign a commission, and as I never had more than 6 men under my orders while I bore that title, I fancy that I have no right to take advantage of it. But I myself made you a captain, said the princess, and you are therefore a captain. Ah, that is just where my embarrassment redoubles, and my conscience cries more loudly than ever. For I have since become convinced that every military grade in the state must emanate from the royal authority in order to have any value. Now, your highness did, beyond question, desire to make me a captain, but in my opinion you had not the right. That being so, I am no more a captain now than I was a lieutenant before. Even so, monsieur, assume that you are not a lieutenant by virtue of your own act, and that you are not a captain by mine, as neither you nor I have the right to sign a commission. At least you are Governor Braun, and as the king himself signed your commission, you will not contest its validity. In very truth, madam, it is the most contestable of the three. How so? Cried the princess. I was appointed, I grant you, but I never entered upon my duties. What constitutes the title? Not the bare possession of the title itself, but the performance of the functions attached to the title. Now, I never performed a single one of the functions of the post to which I was promoted. I never set foot in my jurisdiction. There was on my part no entrance upon my duties. Therefore, I am no more Governor Braun than I was a captain before being governor, or lieutenant before being a captain. But you were taken upon the road to Braun, monsieur. True, but 100 yards beyond the point where I was arrested, the road divides. Thence one road leads to Braun, but the other to Issen. Who can say that I was not going to Issen, rather than to Braun? Enough, said the princess. The tribunal will take under consideration the force of your defense. Clerk, write him down Governor Braun. I cannot prevent your highness from ordering the clerk to write down whatever seems best to you. It is done, madam, said the clerk. Good. Now, monsieur, sign your deposition. It would give me the greatest pleasure, madam, said Cavaignac. I should be enchanted to do anything that would be agreeable to your highness. But in the struggle I was forced to wage this morning against the populace of Bordeaux, a struggle in which your highness so generously came to my rescue with your musketeers, I had the misfortune to have my right wrist injured, and it has always been impossible for me to write with my left hand. Record the refusal of the accused to sign, monsieur, said the princess to the clerk. Impossibility, monsieur. Write impossibility, said Cavaignac. God forbid that I should refuse to do anything in my power at the bidding of so great a princess as your highness. With that, Cavaignac bowed with the utmost respect and left the room, accompanied by his 2 guards. I think that you were right, Monsieur Lennet, said the Duc de la Rochefoucauld, and that we were wrong not to make sure of that man. Lennet was too preoccupied to reply. This time his usual perspicacity was sadly at fault. He hoped that Cavaignac would draw down the wrath of the tribunal upon a single head, but with his everlasting subterfuges he had amused his judges rather than irritated them. Moreover, his examination had destroyed all the effect, if any, produced by Quenouille's, and the noble bearing, the outspokenness and loyalty of the first prisoner had disappeared, if we may say so, beneath the wiles of the second. Cavaignac had effaced Quenouille's, and so when the vote was taken, every vote was given for death. The princess, after the votes were counted, rose and solemnly pronounced the judgment of the court. Then each one in turn signed the record of the sitting. First the Duc d'Enghien, poor child, who knew not what he was signing, and whose first signature was to cost the life of man, then the princess, then the dukes, then the ladies of the council, then the officers and sheriffs. Thus everybody had a share in the reprisals. Nobility and bourgeoisie, army and parliament. Everybody must be punished for the act of vengeance. As everybody knows, when all the world in general must be punished, the result is that nobody at all is punished. When the last signature had been appended, the princess, who had her vengeance in her grasp at last, and whose pride was satisfied thereby, went herself and opened the window, which had been opened twice before, and, yielding to her consuming thirst for popularity, exclaimed in a loud voice, Men of Bordeaux, Riccon will be avenged, and fitly. Rely upon us for that. A shout of joy, like the roar of thunder, welcomed this declaration, and the people scattered through the streets, happy in the anticipation of the spectacle promised by the words of Princess. But Madame de Conde had no sooner returned to her own room with Lennet, who followed her sadly, still hoping to induce her to change her resolution, than the door was thrown open, and Madame de Cambes, pale as death and weeping bitterly, threw herself at her feet. "Oh, madam, in heaven's name, listen to me," she cried. "In heaven's name, do not turn me away." "What's the matter, pray, my child?" inquired the princess. "Why do you weep?" "I weep, madam, because I have learned that the judges voted for death, and that you ratified their vote. And yet, madam, you cannot put Monsieur de Canoles to death." "Why not, my dear, I pray to know? They put Richness to death." "Because, madam, the same Monsieur de Canoles saved your highness at Chantilly. Ought I to thank him for being deceived by our stratagem?" "Ah, madam, that's where you are in error. Monsieur de Canoles was not for one instant deceived by the substitution. He recognized me at the first glance." "Recognize you, Claire?" "Yes, madam. We made a part of the journey together. Monsieur de Canoles was in love with me, and under those circumstances—" "Ah, madam, perhaps he did wrong, but it is not for you to reproach him for it. Under those circumstances, he sacrificed his duty to his love. So the man whom you love—" "Yes," said the Viscountess. "The man whom you asked my leave to marry—" "Yes." Was Monsieur de Canoles himself," cried the Viscountess. "Monsieur de Canoles, who surrendered to me at St. George, and who, except for me, would have blown up the citadel with himself and your soldiers. Monsieur de Canoles, who might have escaped, but who surrendered his sword to me rather than be parted from me. You see, therefore, that if he dies, I must die too, madam, for his death will lie at my door." "My dear child," said the princess, deeply moved, "consider, I pray you, that what you ask is impossible. Richness is dead, and Richness must be avenged. The matter has been duly discussed, and the judgment must be executed. If my husband himself should ask what you ask, I would refuse him." "Oh, wretched creature that I am," cried Madame de Cambes, throwing herself upon the floor and sobbing as if her heart would break. "I have destroyed my lover." Thereupon Lennet, who had not as yet spoken, approached the princess. "Madam," said he, "is not one victim enough? Must you have two heads to pay for Monsieur Richness?" "Aha!" said the princess. "Monsieur the upright man, that means that you ask the life of one and the death of the other. Is that absolutely just? Tell me." "It is just, madam, when two men are to die, in the first place that one only should die, if possible, assuming that any mouth has a right to blow out the torch lighted by God's hand. In the second place, it is just, if there is anything to choose between the two, that the upright man should be preferred to the schemer. One must needs be a Jew to set Barabbas at liberty and crucify Jesus." "Oh, Monsieur Lennet, cried Claire, "plead for me, I implore you, for you are a man, and mayhap you will be listened to. And do you, madam," she continued, turning to the princess, "remember that I have passed my life in the service of your family." "And so have I," said Lennet, "and yet I have asked no reward for 30 years of fidelity to your highness. But at this juncture, if your highness is without pity, I will ask a single favor in exchange for these 30 years of fidelity." "What might it be?" "That you will give me my dismissal, madam, so that I may throw myself at the king's feet and consecrate to him what remains of the life I had devoted to the honor of your family." "Ah, well," exclaimed the princess, vanquished by this combined attack, "do not threaten, my old friend. Do not weep, my sweet Claire. Be comforted both, for only one shall die, since you will have it so. But do not come and seek pardon for the one who is destined to die." Claire seized the princess's hand and devoured it with kisses. "Oh, thanks, madam, thanks," she sobbed. "From this moment my life and his are at your service." "In taking this course, madam," said Lennet, "you will be at the same time just and merciful, which hitherto has been the prerogative of God alone." "And now, madam," cried Claire impatiently, "may I see him? May I set him free?" "Such a demonstration at this moment is out of the question," said the princess. "It would injure us irreparably. Let us leave them both in prison. We will take them out at the same time, one to be set at liberty, the other to go to his death. But may I not at least see him, to set his mind at rest, to comfort him? To set his mind at rest? Said the princess. My dear child, I think that you have not the right. The reversal of the judgment will be discovered and commented upon. No, it cannot be. Be content to know that he is safe. I will make known my decision to the two dukes. I will be patient, madam. Thanks. Thanks, cried Claire, and she fled from the room to weep at her ease and thank God from the bottom of her heart, which was overflowing with joy and gratitude. 22. The two prisoners of war occupied two adjoining rooms in the same fortress. The rooms were located on the ground floor, which in most prisons might properly be called the third floor. For prisons do not as a general rule begin at the ground like houses, but have 2 stories of underground dungeons. Each door of the prison was guarded by a detachment of men selected from among the princess's guards. But the crowd, having taken note of the preparations which satisfied its thirst for vengeance, gradually melted away from the neighborhood of the prison, whither it had hurried upon learning that Canolles and Cavaignac had been taken there. Whereupon the guards who were stationed in the inner corridor rather protect the prisoners from the popular fury than from any fear their escaping, left their posts, and thenceforth the ordinary sentries were simply doubled. The people, finding that there was nothing more to be seen where they were, naturally betook themselves to the spot where executions generally took place, the esplanade. To wit, the words tossed down to them from the council hall were instantly circulated throughout the city, and everyone drew his own conclusions from them. But the one thing about which there could be no doubt was that there would be a spectacle of horrible interest that same night, or on the following day at latest. It was an additional fascination for them not to know precisely what to look forward to. Artisans, tradesmen, women, and children hurried toward the ramparts, and as it was quite dark and the moon would not rise until about midnight, many carried torches in their hands. Almost all the windows were open, too, and many people had placed torches or lamps on the windowsills, as they were accustomed to do on fête days. But the ominous muttering of the crowd, the terrified glances of the sightseers, and the frequent passage of patrols on foot and mounted, afforded sufficient evidence that it was no ordinary fête for which such lugubrious preparations were being made. From time to time cries of rage arose from the groups, which formed and dissolved with a rapidity characteristic of the effect of a certain class of occurrences. These cries always resembled those which penetrated to the council hall on several occasions. Death to the prisoners, vengeance for Riccon, the cries, the bright light, the tread of many horses interrupted Madame de Cambes' devotions. She went to her window and looked out in dismay at all the men and women with eyes flashing fiercely, who seemed like wild beasts let loose in the arena, roaring for the human victims they were to devour. She asked herself how it could be that all these human beings, whom the two prisoners had never injured in any way, could so savagely demand the death of 2 of their fellow creatures, and she could find no reply to her question. Poor woman, for of all the passions of mankind she knew only those which soften the heart. From a window at which she stood, Madame de Cambes could see the summit of the high, frowning towers of the fortress above the roofs of the houses and the treetops. That was where Canolles was, and her eyes wandered most frequently to them. But she could not avoid turning them from time to time into the street, and then she would see those threatening faces and hear those blood-curdling cries of vengeance, and an icy shudder would run through her veins. "Ah," she said to herself, "in vain do they forbid my seeing him. I must find a way to get to him. These horrible noises may reach his ear. He may think that I have forgotten him. He may accuse me. He may curse me. Oh, every moment that passes without my trying to find a way to comfort him seems to me like treachery to him. It is impossible for me to continue inactive, when perhaps he is calling me to his rescue. Oh, I must see him. Yes, but, mon Dieu, how to get to see him? Who will take me to the prison? What power have I to order the doors opened? Madame la Princesse has refused to give me a pass, and she had just granted so much in answer to my prayers that she was quite right to refuse. There are guards. There are enemies of us around the fortress. The whole population has scented blood and doesn't propose to be cheated of its prey. They will think that I mean to help him escape, rescue him. Oh, yes, and I would rescue him if he had not already the safeguard of Her Highness's word. If I tell them that I simply want to see him, they won't believe me and will turn me away. And again, do I not run the risk of losing what I have already gained if I take this step against Madame la Princesse will? Will she not be likely to retract the promise she gave me? And yet to leave him to pass the long hours of the night, in anguish and torture. Oh, I feel that it is impossible. For myself, even more than for him, I will pray God for help, and perhaps he will inspire me. Thereupon Madame de Cambes, for the second time, knelt before her crucifix, and began to pray with a fervor which might have touched Madame la Princess's heart, could she have heard her. Oh, I will not go, said she, for I understand that it is indeed impossible for me to go thither. All night he will perhaps accuse me of abandoning him. But tomorrow, my God, will set me right in his sight, will it not? Meanwhile, the uproar, the constantly increasing excitement of the crowd, the sinister glare which shone into her room, where there was no light and at times illuminated as by lightning, caused her such intense terror that she placed her hands over her ears and pressed her closed eyes against the cushion of her prie-dieu. At that moment the door opened, and, unheard by her, a man entered, after pausing a moment upon the threshold, with an expression of affectionate compassion. When he saw how her whole body was shaken by her sobbing, he approached with a sigh and laid his hand upon her arm. Claire rose to her feet in dismay. "Monsieur Lennet," she exclaimed, "Monsieur Lennet, ah, you have not abandoned me." "No," was the reply. "I fear that you were but partly reassured, and I venture to come to you to ask if I could be of service to you in any way." "Oh, my dear Monsieur Lennet," cried Claire, "how good you are and how grateful I am to you." "It seems that I was not mistaken," said Lennet. "One rarely is mistaken, God knows, when one fancies that one's fellow creatures are suffering," he added with a sad smile. "Ah, monsieur," cried Claire, "you say truly, I am indeed suffering. Did you not obtain all that you desired, madam, and more, I confess, than I myself dare hope?" "Yes, of course, but I understand. You are terrified, are you not, to see the fierce joy of this mob and its thirst for blood, and you are moved to pity for the fate of the other poor wretch who is to die in your lover's place?" Claire was silent for a moment with pale cheeks and her eyes fixed upon Lennet's. Then she put her hand to her sweat-bedewed brow. "Oh, forgive me, or rather curse me," said she, "for, selfish brute that I am, I have not even thought of him. No, Lennet, no. In all possible humility, I confess that these fears, these prayers, these tears of mine are for him who is to live. For, absorbed as I am by my love, I have forgotten him who is to die." Lennet smiled sadly. "Yes," said he, "that may well be, for it is human nature. It may be that the selfishness of individuals is the salvation of the masses. Every one cuts a circle about himself and his own people with a sword. Come, madam," he continued, "pursue your confession to the end. Confess frankly that you are in haste to have the poor wretch undergo his fate, for his death will ensure the safety of your fiancée." "Oh, I hadn't thought of that as yet, Lennet. Upon my word I hadn't. But do not turn my thoughts in that direction, for I love him so dearly that I do not know what I may be capable of wishing in the intensity of my love." "Poor child," said Lennet, in a most compassionate tone, "why did you not say all this sooner?" "Oh, mon Dieu, you terrify me. Is it too late? Is he not really safe?" "He is, since Madame la Princesse has given her word. But what? Alas! Can one be sure of anything in this world? And do not you yourself, who believe as I do that he is safe, weep instead of rejoicing?" "I weep because I cannot visit him, my friend," Claire replied. "Consider that he must hear these fearful noises and believe that he is in imminent danger. Consider that he may accuse me of lukewarmness, of forgetfulness, of treachery. Oh, Lennet, Lennet, what torture! Really, if the princess knew how I suffer, she would have pity on me." "Very well, Viscountess, you must see him." "See him? Impossible. You are well aware that I asked leave of Her Highness to see him, and that Her Highness refused." "I know, and I approve her refusal with all my heart. And yet you advise me to disobey," cried Claire in surprise, gazing earnestly at Lennet, who lowered his eyes in confusion. "I am old, dear Viscountess, and suspicious just because I am old. Not in this matter, for the princess's word is sacred. She has said that only one of the prisoners shall die. But accustomed as I have become the course of a long life to see fortune turn against the one who seems most secure of her favor, my rule is always to seize any opportunity that presents itself. See your fiancée, Viscountess. Take my advice and see him. Oh, Leonard, you terrify me beyond words. Really, you do. I have no such intention. Moreover, would you prefer that I advise you not to see him? You would not, would you? And you would scold me even more severely, I know, if I had said the opposite of what I do say. Yes, I admit it. But you tell me to see him. That was my one desire. I was praying when you arrived that I might be allowed to see him. But isn't it impossible? Is anything impossible to the woman who took St. George? Asked Leonard with a smile. Alas, said Claire, for 2 hours I have been trying to think of some way of obtaining admission to the fortress, but I cannot. What would you give me if I were to show you a way? I would give you my hand on the day that I go to the altar with him. Thanks, my child, said Leonard. Indeed, you could do nothing more acceptable to me, for I love you like a father. Thanks. Tell me the way, said Claire. It is this. I asked Madame la Princesse for a pass to allow me to talk with the prisoners. For there were any way of saving Captain Cavaignac, I would be glad to enroll him in our party. But the pass is useless to me now, as you condemned him to death with your prayers for Monsieur de Canolles. Claire could not repress a shudder. So take this paper, continued Leonard. There is no name mentioned in it, you see. Claire took it and read. The keeper of the fortress will permit the bearer of this to converse for half an hour with either of the 2 prisoners of war, as he may choose. Claire Clements de Condé. You have a suit of man's clothes, said Leonard. Put it on. You have the permit. Use it. Poor fellow, murmured Claire, unable to banish from her mind the thought of Cavaignac to be executed in place of Canolles. He undergoes a common fate, said Leonard. Being weak, he is devoured by the strong. Having no protector, he pays for him who has. He is an intelligent fellow. Claire, meanwhile, was turning the paper over and over in her hands. Do you know, said she, that you tempt me cruelly with this permit? Do you know that if I once hold my poor friend in my arms, I am quite capable of taking him with me to the ends of the world? I would advise you to do it, madam, if it were possible. But this permit does not give you carte blanche, and you can use it for no other purpose than that for which it was intended. True, said Claire, reading it once more, and yet they have given me Monsieur de Canolles. He is mine. They cannot take him from me again, nor does anyone think of doing so. Come, madam, waste no time. Don your male costume and be gone. This permit gives you half an hour. I know that half an hour is very little, but after the half hour will come your whole life. You are young and have many years before you. God grant that they be happy years. Claire seized Leonard's hand, drew him to her side, and kissed his forehead as she might have done to the most affectionate of fathers. Go, said Leonard, pushing her gently toward the door. Do not lose time. The man who truly loves is never resigned. As he watched her pass into another room, where Pompey, at her bidding, was waiting to assist in her transformation. Alas, he muttered, who knows? 23. The threatening shouts of the excited crowd had not, in fact, escaped Canolles' attention. Through the bars at his window, he was able to feast his eyes upon the animated, changing picture which was presented to his view, and which varied little from one end of the city to the other. Pardieu, said he, this is an annoying mischance. Riccon's death. Poor Riccon. He was a gallant fellow. His death will redouble the severity of our captivity. They will not allow me to go about the city as before. No more meetings and no marriage, unless Claire can resign herself to the chapel of a prison. She will be content with that. I know one could be married as well in one chapel as another, but it's an evil omen nonetheless. Why the deuce could they not have received the news tomorrow instead of today? He went to the window and looked out. What a strict watch they are keeping, he continued. 2 sentries. When I think that I shall be mewed up here a week, a fortnight perhaps, until something new occurs to make them forget this. Fortunately, events follow rapidly on one another's heels just now, and the Bordelais are fickle-minded. Meanwhile, I shall have passed some very unpleasant hours all the same. Poor Claire. She must be in despair. Luckily, she knows that I have been arrested. Yes, she knows it, and so knows that I am not at fault. Good lack! Where are all those people going? They seem to be bound for the Esplanade. But there could be no parade there, nor an execution at this hour. They are all going in the same direction. Upon my word, one would say that they know I am here, like a bear behind my bars. Knowles began to pace up and down with folded arms, finding himself within the walls of a real prison. His mind turned for a moment to philosophical ideas, with which he commonly bothered his head but little. What an idiotic thing war is, he muttered. Here is poor Rickon, with whom I dined hardly a month ago, dead. He ought to have made sure of death by a cannonball, as I would have done if any other than the Viscountess had besieged me. This war of women is, in good sooth, the most to be dreaded of all wars. At least, I have had no share in the death of a friend. Thank God, I haven't drawn my sword against my brother. That is a consolation to me. And it is to my little feminine good genius that I owe that, too. Take it for all in all, I owe her many things. At that moment, an officer entered and interrupted Knowles' soliloquy. Do you wish for supper, monsieur? He asked. If so, give your orders. The jailer is instructed to furnish you with whatever you desire. Well, said Knowles. It would seem that they propose at least to treat me honorably while I remain here. I feared something different for an instant when I saw the stern face of the princess and the repellent bearing of all her judges. I am waiting, rejoined the officer, bowing. To be sure, I beg your pardon. The extreme courtesy of your question led to certain reflections. Let us return to the matter in hand. Yes, monsieur, I will sup, for I am very hungry, but I am of sober habits, and a soldier's supper will content me. Now, said the officer, drawing nearer to him with evident interest, have you no commissions in the city? Do you expect nothing? You say that you are a soldier. So am I. Look upon me, therefore, as a comrade. Knowles stared at him in amazement. No, monsieur, said he. No, I have no commissions in the city. No, I expect nothing, unless it be a certain person whom I may not name. As for looking upon you as a comrade, I thank you for the suggestion. Here is my hand, monsieur, and later, if I need anything, I will remember what you say. It was the officer's turn to stare at Knowles in amazement. Very well, monsieur, said he. You'll be served at once. And he withdrew. A moment later, 2 soldiers entered with the supper. It was more elaborate than Knowles had asked for, and he sat down at the table and ate heartily. The soldiers, in their turn, gazed wonderingly at him. Knowles mistook their amazement for envy, and as the wine was excellent Guienne, he said to them, My friends, order 2 glasses. One of the soldiers smiled and procured the articles in question. Knowles filled them, then poured a few drops of wine into his own. Your health, my friend, said he. The 2 soldiers took their glasses, mechanically touched them to Knowles, and drank without reciprocating his toast. They are not very polite, thought Knowles, but they drink well. One cannot have everything. He continued his supper, and brought it triumphantly to a close. When he had finished, he rose, and the soldiers removed the table. The officer returned. Pardieu, monsieur, said Knowles, you should have supped with me. The supper was excellent. I could not enjoy that honor, monsieur, for I have just left the table myself. I return. To bear me company, said Knowles. If so, accept my warmest thanks, monsieur, for it is very kind of you. No, monsieur, my errand is less agreeable. I come to inform you that there is no minister in the prison, and that the chaplain is a Catholic. I know you to be a Protestant, and this fact may annoy you somewhat. Annoy me, monsieur? How so? Demanded Knowles innocently. Why? Said the embarrassed officer. In the matter of your devotions. My devotions? Nonsense, laughed Knowles. I will think of that tomorrow. I pray only in the morning. The officer stared at Knowles in open-mouthed astonishment, which gradually changed to profound compassion. He bowed and left the room. Damnation, said Knowles. Why? Everyone is crazy. Since poor Rickon's death, everybody I meet has the aspect of an idiot or a madman. Sarpejeu, shall I never see a sensible face again? The words were hardly out of his mouth when the door opened once more, and before he had time to see who had opened it, some one threw herself into his arms, and winding her arms around his neck, deluged his face with tears. God's mercy, cried the prisoner, extricating himself from the embrace. Another lunatic. Upon my soul, I believe I am in an asylum. But the gesture that he made in stepping back knocked the newcomer's hat to floor, and the lovely blonde tresses of Madame de Cambes fell down about her shoulders. "You here!" he cried, rushing to her and taking her in his arms once more. "You... Oh, forgive me for not recognizing you, or rather for not divining your presence." "Hush!" said she, picking up her hat and hastily replacing on her head. "Hush! For if they knew it was I, perhaps they would turn me out. At last I am permitted to see you once more. Oh, mon Dieu, how happy I am!" Her bosom heaved, and she sobbed as if her heart would break. "Once more," said Quenouille. "You are permitted to see me once more, you say? In heaven's name, are you not to see me more than this once?" he added, with a laugh. "Oh, do not laugh," said Claire. "My dear love, your gaiety distresses me. Do not laugh, I implore you. I have had such difficulty in procuring admission. If you knew. And I was so near not being able to come at all, except for Leonard, the best of men. But less talk of yourself, my poor dear. Mon Dieu, it is really you, is it not? It is really you whom I can press to my heart again." "Why, yes, it is really I," said Quenouille, smiling. "Oh, do not affect this cheerful demeanor. It is useless. I know all. They did not know that I loved you, so they hid nothing from me." "What is it that you know, pray?" queried Quenouille. "You expected me, didn't you?" the Viscountess continued. "You were displeased by my silence? Were you not already blaming me? Unhappy and dissatisfied I was, beyond question, but I did not blame you. I suspected that circumstances stronger than you kept you from my side, and the main cause of my unhappiness, through it all, has been the necessary postponement of our marriage for a week, perhaps for 2 weeks. Claire stared at Quenouille in like amazement to that exhibited by the officer a moment before. "Are you speaking seriously?" said she. "Are you not really any more alarmed than you seem to be?" "Alarmed?" said Quenouille. "Alarmed at what? Can it be," he added with a laugh, "that I am exposed to some danger of which I know nothing?" "Oh, the poor fellow!" cried Claire. "He knew nothing of it." Dreading, doubtless, to reveal the whole truth without warning to him whose life was imperiled thereby, she checked, by a violent effort, the words that had risen from her heart to her lips. "No, I know nothing," said Quenouille gravely. "But you will tell me, won't you? I am a man. Speak, Claire, speak." "You know that Richon is dead?" said she. "Yes, I know it. But do you know how he died?" "No, but I suspect. He was killed at his post, was he not, in the breach at Vayres?" Claire was silent for a moment. Then, in a tone as solemn as that of a bell tolling for the dead, she replied, "He was hanged in the marketplace at Libourne." Quenouille started back. "Hanged!" he cried. "Richon, a soldier!" Suddenly the color fled from his cheeks, and he drew his trembling hand across his brow. "Ah, now I understand all," said he. "I understand my arrest, my examination, the officer's words, and the silence of soldiers. I understand the step you had taken, your tears when you found me so cheerful. I understand the crowds, the cries, and the threats. Richon was murdered, and they will revenge Richon upon me." "No, no, my beloved. No, beloved of my heart," cried Claire, beaming with joy, seizing both Quenouille's hands, and gazing with all her soul into his eyes. "No, they will not sacrifice you, dear prisoner. You were not mistaken. You were marked out for sacrifice. You were condemned. You were doomed to die. Death was very near to you, my darling fiancée. But have no fear. You may speak of happiness and of the future, for she whose whole life is consecrated to you has saved your life. Be joyous and happy, but beneath your breath, for you may awake your ill-fated companion, upon whose head the storm will break, who is to die in your place." "Oh, hush, hush, dear love. You freeze my blood with horror," said Quenouille, hardly recovered, despite Claire's ardent caresses, from the terrible blow he had received. I, so calm and confident, so idiotically happy, was in imminent danger of death. And when? At what moment of all others? Just heaven, at the moment when I was to become your husband. Upon my soul, it would have been a double murder. "They call that reprisal," said Claire. "Yes, yes, it is true, they are right. Now you are frowning and pensive again." "Oh," cried Quenouille, "it isn't I fear death, but death would part us. If you had died, my love, I should have died too. But instead of giving way to sadness, rejoice with me. Look you, tonight, perhaps within an hour, you will leave the prison. Either I will come here myself for you, or I will await you at the outer door. Then, without losing a moment, a second, we will fly. Oh, instantly. I cannot wait. This accursed city terrifies me. Today I have succeeded in saving you, but tomorrow some other unforeseen mischance may take you from me again. Ah, Claire, my best beloved, do you know that this is almost too great happiness at a single stroke? Yes, in very truth, too great happiness. I shall die of it. Well then, said Claire, be joyous and cheerful, as you naturally are. Why do not you do the same? See, I am laughing, and that sigh, the sigh, my dearest, is for the poor wretch who pays for our joy with his life. Yes, you are right. Oh, why can you not take me away with you at this moment? Come, my good angel, open your wings and fly away with me. Patience, patience, my beloved husband. Tomorrow I will carry you. Where? I neither know nor care. To the paradise of our love. Meanwhile I am here. Knowles took her in his arms and strained her to his breast. She threw her arms around his neck and lay unresistingly, trembling with agitation against that heart which was scarcely beating. So oppressed was it by conflicting emotions. Suddenly, for the second time, a heartbreaking sob shook her frame, and happy as she was, her tears fell thick and fast upon Knowles' face. Well, well, said he, is this your cheerfulness, my poor dear angel? It is the last remnant of my sorrow. As she spoke, the door opened, and the same officer announced that the half-hour had expired. Adieu, whispered Knowles, or rather hide me in the folds of your cloak, and take me with you. Hush, dear love, she replied in a low tone, for you break my heart. Do you not see that I am dying with longing to do it? Be patient for your own sake, and for mine. In a few hours we shall meet again, never to part. I am patient, said Knowles joyfully, completely comforted by this assurance. But we must part now. Courage, my dear, and let us say adieu. Adieu, Claire, adieu. Adieu, said she, trying to smile. But she could not complete the cruel word. For the third time her voice was stifled with sobs. Adieu, adieu, cried Knowles, seizing her in his arms anew, and covering her brow with burning kisses. Adieu? The devil, muttered the officer. Luckily I know that the poor fellow has no great reason to fear, or this scene would break my heart. He escorted Claire to the door and then returned. Now, monsieur, said he to Knowles, who had fallen back upon a chair, exhausted by his emotion, it's not enough for you to be happy. You must be compassionate too. Your neighbor, your unfortunate fellow prisoner, who is to die, is entirely alone. No one is interested in him, and he has no one to comfort him. He desires to see you. I have taken upon myself to allow him to do so, but your consent also is necessary. My consent, cried Knowles. Oh, I give it willingly. Poor devil, I await him with open arms. I do not know him, but that makes no difference. He seems to know you, however. Is he aware of the fate in store for him? No, I think not. You understand that he must be left in ignorance of it. Oh, never fear. Listen, then. 11 o'clock will soon strike, and I shall return to the guardhouse. After 11 o'clock, the jailers are supreme in the interior of the prison. Your jailer has been warned that your neighbor will be with you, and he will come here for him when it is time for him to return to his own cell. If he knows nothing, tell him nothing. If he does know, tell him from us that we soldiers all pity him from the bottom of our hearts. To die is nothing but sacrebleu. To be hanged is to die twice over. Is it decided that he is to die? By the same death as Rickon, in order that the reprisal may be complete. But we are chattering here, while he is awaiting your reply. Anxiously, no doubt. Go to him, monsieur, and believe that I am deeply grateful to you, both for him and myself. The officer opened the door of the adjoining cell, and Cavaignac, somewhat pale, but with a jaunty air and with head erect, entered the cell of Knowles, who walked forward several steps to meet him. Thereupon the officer waved his hand to Knowles, cast a pitying glance at Cavaignac, and took his leave, taking with him his soldiers, whose heavy footfalls could be heard for some time in the corridors. Soon the jailer made his round. They heard the clashing of his keys in the different doors. Cavaignac was not depressed, because there was in a man an unalterable confidence in himself, an inextinguishable hope in the future. But beneath his calm exterior and his mask of cheerfulness, a bitter grief was biting at his heart like a serpent. That skeptical soul, which had always doubted everything, had come at last to doubt its very doubts. Since Ricon's death, Cavaignac had not eaten or slept. Accustomed as he was to make light of the misfortunes of others because he took his own so gaily, our philosopher had not once thought of laughing at an event which led to so terrible a result as that, and despite himself he saw, in all the mysterious threads which led up to his responsibility for Ricon's death, the unswerving hand of Providence, and he began to believe, if not in the reward of good deeds, at least in the punishment of evil deeds. He resigned himself to his fate, therefore, and gave himself over to thought. But, as we have said, the result of his resignation was that he no longer ate or slept. It was a strange and mysterious fact that his own death, which he anticipated, moved him much less than the death of the comrade in misfortune, whom he knew to be within 2 yards of him, awaiting the fatal decree, or execution without the formality of a decree. All this turned his thoughts once more to Ricon, his avenging specter, and the twofold catastrophe resulting for what seemed to him a charming piece of mischief. His first idea had been to escape, for, although he was a prisoner on parole, he thought that he might without scruple disregard his engagements, as his captors had disregarded theirs by putting him in prison. But he was shrewd enough to realize that escape was impossible, despite his ingenuity. Thereupon he became more firmly convinced than ever that he was fast in the clutches of inexorable fatality, and he had but one desire, namely, to talk for a few moments with his companion, whose name had caused him a feeling of sad surprise, and to effect a reconciliation in his person with the whole human race he had outraged so shamefully. We do not affirm that all these reflections of his were the results of remorse. No, Cavaignac was too much of a philosopher to suffer from remorse, but it was something that closely resembled it, namely violent self-reproach for having done evil for nothing, with time and a combination of circumstances suited to maintain him in this frame of mind. This sentiment might perhaps have had the same result as remorse, but time was lacking. Upon entering Queneau's cell, Cavaignac waited first of all, with his ordinary prudence, until the officer who showed him had withdrawn. Then, when he saw that the door was securely fastened and the wicket hermetically closed, he walked up to Queneau's, who, as we have said, had taken some steps to meet him, and warmly pressed his hand. Notwithstanding the gravity of his situation, Cavaignac could not forbear a smile as his eye fell upon the handsome, refined young man of venturesome and joyous disposition, whom he had twice before surprised in very different situations, once when his mission was to send him to Nantes, and again to take him to Isle St. George. Furthermore, he recalled his momentary usurpation of his name, and the amusing mystification of the Duke resulting therefrom, and gloomy and forbidding as the prison was, the souvenir was so mirth-provoking that, for a moment, the present was forgotten. For his part, Queneau recognized him at the first glance as the person with whom he had come in contact on the 2 occasions we have mentioned, and as Cavaignac, on those 2 occasions, had been, all things considered, a messenger of good tidings, his compassion for the poor fellow's sad fate increased tenfold, especially as he knew that it was his own safety that made Cavaignac's death inevitable, and in so sensitive a mind as if such a thought caused infinitely deeper remorse than downright crime would have caused a companion. He welcomed him, therefore, with the greatest kindness of manner. "Well, Baron," Cavaignac began, "what do you say to our present situation? It is a little too precarious to be comfortable, it seems to me." "Yes, here we are in prison, and God knows when we shall get away from here," rejoined Queneau, trying to put a good face on the matter, in order to lighten his companion's agony with a ray of hope. "When we shall get away from here," repeated Cavaignac. "May God, whom you invoke, vouchsafe, in his mercy, to postpone it as long as possible. But I do not think he is disposed to respite us for long. I saw from my window, as you must have seen from yours, an excited crowd rushing in a certain direction, toward the esplanade, unless I am much mistaken. You know the esplanade, my dear Baron, and you know to what uses it is put." "Oh, nonsense. You exaggerate the danger, I am sure. The crowd were heading for the esplanade, it is true, but it was to see some military punishment, no doubt. To make us pay for Ricken's death would be frightful. For after all, we are both entirely innocent of his death. Cavaignac started and fastened his eyes upon Quenouille's face with a gloomy expression which gradually softened to one of pity. Well, well, he said to himself, here's a poor fellow who deceives himself as to the situation, but I must tell him how it really stands. For where would be the use of encouraging him in his error only to make the blow more crushing at the last? Whereas, when one has time to prepare, the fall always seems a little easier. After a pause of some duration, he took both Candle's hands in his, and gazing into his face with an intentness which greatly embarrassed him, he said, Monsieur, my dear monsieur, let us send for a bottle or two of the excellent Braun wine you know of. Alas, I might have drunk my fill of it if I had been governor a little longer, and I will even go so far as to admit that my predilection for that vintage led me to apply for that position in preference to any other. God punishes me for my gluttony. I shall be glad to join you, said Quenouille. Very good, and as we drink we will talk. If what I have to tell you is not very pleasant, the wine will be good at least, and one will make up for the other. Quenouille knocked on the door, but there was no response. He knocked still louder, and a child, who was playing in the corridor, came to the door. What do you want? He asked. Wine, said Quenouille. Tell your papa to bring 2 bottles. The child ran off, and a moment later returned to say, Papa is busy talking with a gentleman just now. He will come very soon. Will you let me ask you a question, my dear? Said Cavaignac. What is it? What gentleman is your papa talking with? He asked in his most insinuating tone. With a tall gentleman. This is a charming child, said Cavaignac. Wait a moment, and we shall learn something. How is the gentleman dressed? All in black. The devil! Do you hear? All in black. What is the name of this tall gentleman dressed all in black? Do you happen to know that, my dear? His name is Monsieur Lavie. Aha, said Cavaignac, the king's advocate. I fancy that we have no reason to be apprehensive of anything he is likely to do. Let us take advantage of their conversation to converse ourselves. Here, my little fellow, he added, slipping a piece of money under the door. Here's something to buy marbles with. It's a good thing to make friends everywhere, he continued, as he stood erect once more. The child joyfully seized a coin and thanked the donor. Well, monsieur, said Quenouille, you were saying... Oh, yes. I was saying that you seem to me to be sadly astray as to the fate that awaits us when we leave the prison. You speak of the esplanade, of military punishments, but I am inclined to think that we are the object of the public attention, and that there is something more than mere flogging in the wind. Nonsense, said Quenouille. Zounds! Monsieur, you look at things in rather a more cheerful light than I am able to do. Perhaps because you haven't the same reasons for alarm that I have. But don't boast too much of your prospects, for they read not over-flattering. Yours are nothing, however, compared to mine, and mine, I must say it because I am firmly convinced that it is so, are most infernally dark. Do you know who I am, monsieur? That's a strange question, surely. You are Captain Cavaignac, governor of Braun, I suppose. Yes, for the moment, but I have not always borne that name or that title. I have changed my name very often and have tried many different titles. For instance, one day I called myself Baron de Quenouille, just as you call yourself. Quenouille looked him in the eye. Yes, I understand, pursued Cavaignac. You are wondering whether I am insane, are you not? Have no fears on that score, for I am in full possession of all my mental faculties, and have never been more completely sane. Explain yourself, then, said Quenouille. Nothing easier. Monsieur le Duc d'Epernon. You know Monsieur le Duc d'Epernon, do you not? By name only, I never saw him. Luckily for me, Monsieur d'Epernon, I say, surprised me one day at a certain house where I knew that you were a favored guest. So I took the liberty of borrowing your name. Monsieur, what mean you? There, softly. Don't be selfish enough to be jealous of one woman, just as you are on the point of marrying another. And even if you should be, and it would be quite consistent with human nature, for man is a vile brute. You will forgive me in a moment. I am too closely connected with you for you to quarrel with me. I do not understand a word that you are saying, monsieur. I say that I have a right to be treated by you as a brother, or at least as a brother-in-law. You speak in enigmas, and I am still all at sea. Very good. I will enlighten you with a single word. My true name is Roland de Lartigues, and Nanan is my sister. Canole's suspicions gave way before a sudden swelling of the heart. You, Nanan's brother, he cried. Oh, poor fellow. Yes, poor fellow indeed, rejoined Cavaignac. You have hit the point exactly. For in addition to a multitude of other disagreeable circumstances connected with my encounter with the authorities here, is that of bearing the name of Roland de Lartigues and of being Nanan's brother. You are aware that my dear sister is not in the odor of sanctity in the nostrils of Messrs. Les Bordelais. Once let it be known that I am Nanan's brother, and I am thrice lost. Now there is one La Rochefoucauld here, and one Lennet, who know everything. Ah, said Canoles, in whose mind Cavagnac's words awoke certain memories. Ah, I understand now why poor Nanan called me her brother in that letter. Dear girl. Yes, said Cavaignac. She was indeed a dear girl, and I much regret that I did not always follow her instructions to the letter. But what would you have? If one could foretell the future, there would be no need of God. What has become of her? Canoles asked. Who can say? Poor child. She is in despair, no doubt. Not on my account, for she doesn't know of my arrest, but for you, whose fate it is more than likely that she has learned. Have no fear, said Canoles. Lennet will not disclose the fact that you are Nanan's brother, and Monsieur de la Rochefoucauld has no reason to wish you ill, so no one will know anything about it. If they know nothing about that, they will know enough else. Believe me. For instance, they will know that it was I who provided a certain document signed in blank, and that blank signature. But damnation! Let us forget, if we can. What pity that the wine doesn't come, he continued, looking toward the door. There's nothing like wine to make a fellow forget. Come, come, said Canoles, courage. Pardieu, do you think that I lack it? Wait until you see me at the critical moment, when we go for a turn on the esplanade. But there's one thing that worries me. Shall we be shot, beheaded, or hanged? Hanged, cried Canoles. Great God, we are noblemen, and they will not inflict such an outrage on the nobility. Oh, you will see that they are quite capable of picking flaws in my genealogy. Then, too, what now? Will you, or I be the one to go first? For God's sake, my dear friend, said Canoles, don't get such ideas in your head. Nothing is less certain than this death that you anticipate so confidently. People are not tried, condemned, and executed in a night. Hark ye, rejoined Cavaignac. I was over yonder when they tried poor Rickon. God rest his soul. Trial, judgment, hanging, all together, lasted hardly more than 3 or 4 hours. Let us allow for somewhat less activity in this case. For Madame d'Autriche is Queen of France, and Madame de Condé is only a princess of blood, and that gives us 4 or 5 hours. As it is 3 hours since we were arrested, and 2 since we appeared before our judges, we can count upon an hour or 2 more to live. That's but short time. In any event, said Canoles, they will wait till daybreak before executing us. Ah, that is not at all certain. An execution by torchlight is a very fine spectacle. It costs more, to be sure, but as Madame la Princesse is much in need of the assistance of the Bordelais, it may well be that she will decide to incur the extra expense. Hush, said Canoles, I hear footsteps. The devil, exclaimed Cavaignac, turning a shade paler. It's the wine, no doubt, said Canoles. Ah, yes, said Cavaignac, gazing more than earnestly at the door. It may be that. If the jailer enters with the bottles, all is well. If, on the other hand, the door opened, and the jailer entered without the bottles. Canoles and Cavaignac exchanged a significant glance, but the jailer took no note of it. He seemed to be in such haste, the time was so short, and it was so dark in the cell. He entered and closed the door. Then he walked up to the prisoners and said, drawing a paper from his pocket, "Which of you is Baron de Canoles?" "The devil!" they exclaimed with one voice, exchanging a second glance. Canoles hesitated before replying, and Cavaignac did the same. The former had borne the name too long to doubt that the question was meant for him, but the other had borne it sufficiently long to fear that his falsehood was coming home to him. However, Canoles understood that he must reply, so at last he said, "I am he." The jailer drew nearer to him. "You were the governor of a fortress?" he inquired. Yes, but so was I governor of a fortress. I, too, have borne the name of Canolles, said Carvignac. Come, explain yourself, and let there be no mistake. Mischief enough has come out of my transactions with regard to poor Rickon, without my being the cause of another man's death. So your name is Canolles now, said the jailer to Canolles. Yes. And your name was formerly Canolles? He said to Carvignac. Yes, was the reply. For a single day, and I begin to think that I made a great fool of myself that day. You were both governors of fortresses. Yes, they replied in the same breath. Now for one more question, which will clear up the whole matter. The two prisoners waited in absolute silence. Which of you, said the jailer, is the brother of Madame Nanon de Lartigues? Carvignac made a grimace, which would have been comical at a less solemn moment. Did I not tell you, he said to Canolles, did I not tell you, my dear fellow, that that was where they would attack me? If I should tell you, he added, turning to the jailer, that I am Madame Nanon de Lartigues' brother, what would you say to me, my friend? I should tell you to follow me instantly. Damnation! Ejaculated Carvignac. But she has also called me her brother, said Canolles, trying in some degree to avert the storm that was evidently gathering over the head of his unfortunate companion. One moment, said Carvignac, passing in front of the jailer and taking Canolles aside. One moment, my young friend. It isn't fair that you should be Nanon's brother under such circumstances. I have made others pay my debts enough, and it's no more than fair that I should take my turn at paying them. What do you mean? Demanded Canolles. Oh, it would take too long to tell you, and you see our jailer is losing patience, and tapping his foot on the floor. It's all right, my friend, all right. Never fear, I will go with you. Adieu, my dear fellow. My doubts are set at rest on one point at least, for I know that I am to go first. God grant that you do not follow me too quickly. Now it remains to know what sort of death it is to be. The devil, if only it isn't hanging. Oh, I am coming, pardieu, I am coming. You in a terrible hurry, my good man. Well then, my dear brother-in-law, my dear friend, a last adieu and good night. With that, Carvignac stepped toward Canolles and held out his hand, which Canolles grasped in both his own and pressed affectionately. Meanwhile, Carvignac was looking at him with a strange expression. What do you want? Said Canolles. Have you any request to make? Yes. Then make it boldly. Do you sometimes pray? Yes. Well, then when you pray, say a word for me. He turned to the jailer, whose impatience was visibly increasing. I am Madame Nanon de Lartigues' brother, said he. Come, my friend. The jailer did not wait for him to say it a second time, but hastily left the room, followed by Carvignac, who waved a last farewell to Canolles from the threshold. The door closed behind them. Their steps receded rapidly, and everything relapsed into absolute silence, which seemed to him who was left behind like the silence of death. Canolles fell into a melancholy frame of mind, which resembled terror. This fashion of spiriting a man away by night, without commotion, without guards, was more alarming than the preparations for the infliction of the death penalty when made in broad daylight. All his fear, however, was on his companion's behalf, for his confidence in Madame de Cambes was so great that since he had seen her, he was absolutely without fear for himself, notwithstanding the alarming nature of the news she brought. So it was that the sole subject of his absorption at that moment was the fate in store for the comrade who was taken from him. Thereupon Carvignac's last request came to his mind. He fell upon his knees and prayed. In a few moments he rose, feeling comforted and strong, and awaiting calmly the arrival of the succor promised by Madame de Cambes, or her own presence. Meanwhile, Carvignac followed the jailer through the dark corridor without a word, and reflecting as deeply as his nature allowed him to do. At the end of the corridor, the jailer closed the door with the least possible noise, and after listening for a moment to certain ill-defined sounds which came up from the lower floors, turned sharply to Carvignac and said, "Come, my gentlemen, off we go." "I am ready," rejoined Carvignac majestically. "Don't speak so loud," said the jailer, "and walk faster." And he started down a stairway leading to the underground dungeons. "Oh ho!" said Carvignac to himself. "Do they propose to cut my throat in some dark corner or consign me to a dungeon? I have heard it said that they sometimes content themselves with exhibiting the four limbs on a public square, as Caesar Borgia did with Ramiro d'Orco. This jailer is all alone, and his keys are at his belt. The keys must open some door or other. He is short, I am tall. He is weak, I am strong. He is in front, I am behind. I can very soon choke the life out of him if I choose. Do I choose? Cavaignac, having decided that he did choose, had already extended his muscular hands to put his plan in execution, when the jailer suddenly turned about in a great fright. "Hush!" said he. "Do you hear nothing?" "Upon my word," said Cavaignac, still speaking to himself, "there is something decidedly mysterious in all this, and so much caution ought to alarm me greatly, if it doesn't reassure me." He stopped abruptly and demanded, "Whither are you taking me?" "Don't you see?" said the jailer. "Into the vaults." "Deuce take me," said Cavaignac. "Do they propose to bury me alive?" The jailer shrugged his shoulders and led the way through a labyrinth of winding corridors until they came to a low arched door on which the moisture stood in great drops. From the other side came a strange roaring sound. The jailer opened the door. "The river!" cried Cavaignac, starting back in dismay as his eyes fell upon a swiftly flowing stream as black and forbidding as Acheron. "Yes, the river. Do you know how to swim?" "Yes, no. That is to say, why the devil do you ask me that?" "Because if you can't swim, we shall have to wait for a boat that is stationed over yonder, and that means a loss of quarter of an hour, to say nothing of the danger that someone may hear the signal I shall have to give, and so discover us." "Discover us!" cried Cavaignac. "In God's name, my dear fellow, are we escaping?" "Pardieu, of course we are." "Where are we going?" "Where you please." "I am free, then?" "As free as the air." "Oh, my God!" cried Cavaignac. Without adding a word to that eloquent exclamation, without looking to right or left, without thought as to whether his companion was following him, he darted to the river and plunged more rapidly than a hunted otter. The jailer imitated him, and after a quarter of an hour of silent efforts to stem the current, they both were within hailing distance of the boat. The jailer whistled 3 times. The oarsmen, recognizing the preconcerted signal, rowed toward them, promptly lifted them into the boat, bent to their oars without a word, and in less than 5 minutes set them both ashore upon the other bank. "Ouf!" said Cavaignac, who had not uttered a single word from the moment that he threw himself into the stream. "Ouf! I am really saved. Dear jailer of my heart, God will reward you." "I have already received 40,000 livres," said the jailer, "which will help me to wait patiently for the reward God has in store for me." 40,000 livres! Cried Cavaignac in utter stupefaction. "Who the devil could have put out 40,000 livres for me?"